He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Wednesday, March 26th, 2025, the 66th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Oh, let's be reasonable. We have had a few stories this week that I believe are tied together, and that the interplay of these stories is setting us up for some things that I hopefully think we'll see maybe beginning next week with the Liberation Day stuff, but in the coming weeks. And I think that they will all ultimately lead to what I affectionately refer to as Rico Grande, the lawsuit that Donald Trump filed, I think back in 2021, against Hillary Clinton and Marc Elias and numerous other defendants and numerous unnamed defendants, that deals with Russiagate and a bunch of other issues, and everything kind of intersects these issues. And eventually, I think that we will see the special counsel investigations, the Hur investigation, the Durham investigation, and the rest of that all come together into this massive RICO case intended to bring down the entire deep state criminal conspiracy at once, understanding that taking it down piece by piece and seeing these arrests and seeing these court cases is playing into the hands of the enemy, attempting to use their system in a way that would be totally ineffective based on their level of control within that system. And so I think that we're seeing little hints here, and that's the case I'm going to make today. And if you agree with me, wonderful. If you don't, that's all good. I'm happy to be a conspiracy theorist just talking crazy. As I was called throughout much of the end of 2023 and pretty much all of 2024, and basically in that period leading up to any of the elections we've had since 2020. And so let's get started there. And before we do that, actually, let me just fill this out a little bit more, okay? So Trump had some kind of cabinet-esque meeting yesterday. A lot of the cabinet was not there. And he did some executive order signing and some question and answer with the media. One of the executive orders was on election integrity, and we'll get to that in just a second. One of the executive orders was going after another law firm. And one of the executive orders was declassifying documents from Crossfire Hurricane, something that he already did before he left office in January of 2021. And so I think that those intersect with this whole signal chat business. And we're going to get into and some of the hearings that have been held in the Senate and then in Congress in the House today. And so we're going to get into kind of all of those elements, and hopefully you'll see what I see. And I guess we'll just see how it goes. But let's start with the election integrity bit. And this was Donald Trump yesterday in the cabinet room.
I have an executive order for your attention on the very important subject of election integrity. We believe that this executive order is the farthest reaching executive action taken in the history of the Republic to secure our elections. Among numerous other aspects of this executive order, This is going to cut down on illegal immigrants on the voter rolls, ensure that the Department of Homeland Security and the data that they have available is being fully weaponized to ensure that illegal immigrants aren't voting. This will include a citizenship question on the federal voting form for the first time. This executive order instructs the EAC to cut federal funding to states that don't take reasonable steps to secure their election. This calls on the Department of Justice to vigorously prosecute election crimes, particularly in states that we don't believe are in compliance with federal law around election integrity. I could go on and on for a while, sir, but the compliance with national election day rules, cracking down and investigating and prosecuting foreign interference in our elections, revoking President Biden's Executive Order 14019, which essentially weaponized government to corrupt and pollute our election process. There's a lot in here, but we believe that these are very important steps that we need to be taking as an administration at your direction to ensure that our elections are as secure as they possibly can be.
Okay. You all understand that? Yes? Election fraud. You've heard the term. We'll end it, hopefully. At least this will go a long way toward ending it. There are other steps that we will be taking in the coming weeks, and we think we'll be able to end up getting fair elections. Perhaps some people think I shouldn't be complaining because we won in a landslide, but we got to straighten out our election. This country is so sick because of the election, the fake elections and the bad elections, and we're going to straighten it out one way or the other. And it's an honor to sign this one. To sign all of them, but to sign this one is a great honor.
So there we have it. Donald Trump said our elections are fake. He didn't just say rigged. He didn't talk about the social media companies suppressing the story about the Hunter Biden laptop. He didn't talk about illegal immigrants voting. He didn't talk about all of the mainstream explanations for how our elections are manipulated and some of the malfeasance that happens in our elections. While they all still attest to the legitimacy of our elections, Donald Trump called the elections fake. He said our country is so sick because of our fake elections. Now, I'm the only person I'm aware of with a public platform that has been talking about how our elections are fake. It's not that they're rigged. It's not that they're stolen. It's that they're fake. They're not elections. The people running in the elections know they're not elections. The people voting in the elections know they're not elections. And of course, the people running the election system know they're not legitimate elections, where each person goes in and casts their vote, and then that vote is counted accurately, and all the people voting are actually eligible to vote and legally voting in those elections. Everyone involved knows that those things aren't true, and yet we still give our power over to whoever is reported as the winner of these fake elections. Now, Donald Trump has an obvious and overwhelming mandate from the American people. That is his legitimacy. That is the source of all legitimacy for government. And he has it. And not one other person in government has it. Certainly not the non-successor running mate, J.D. Vance. Sorry. No one else has legitimacy in government except for Donald Trump. Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Joe Biden was never a real or legitimate president. It was a fake campaign and a fake election. A fake election cannot bestow legitimacy on anyone other than Donald Trump, the person with the obvious and overwhelming mandate. And his obvious and overwhelming mandate has only increased since Election Day in 2024. And were the election to be held in a legitimate way today, his win would be bigger than it was in 2024. And I don't mean that it would be bigger than it was reported to have been, although it would certainly be that. It was already that when it was reported in 2024, but it would be a lot bigger than that as well. Now, yesterday I posted on Truth Social, Telegram, and Substack a link to a podcast episode I did on January 18th of last year, of 2024. So that was 14 plus months ago. And I listened to it yesterday in full, which I don't normally do. I still would back up every single word of that podcast because it was dead on accurate. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that because there are ways to look at these things, and it turns out that there are right ways and wrong ways to analyze these situations. And the wrong way to analyze these situations is just to continue doing what everyone else is doing and what the consensus accepts. And that's what happened throughout last year. And I took no small measure of shit from supposed Trump supporters and MAGA supporters and truth community people and Q people. And of course, quote unquote, conservatives, all these people. Why? Well, because they thought that me talking about how our elections were fake and could not produce legitimacy would make it so that people wouldn't vote in our fake elections, which would mean we would lose a fake election. And they couldn't deal with that. Why couldn't they deal with it? What does it mean to lose a fake election? Well, what did it mean in 2020? It meant we had to go through the 4 years of the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, where the TV told us that everything was falling apart. And did everything fall apart? Well, some things were definitely very bad. Vaccine mandates cost people their jobs, people who didn't comply. But those people actually, I'm sure by now, have rebounded and figured out other paths in their lives. Okay? Which is not to say I don't have sympathy for them. I dealt with the same situation myself in 2020 when my career was ended in the snap of Gavin Newsom's fingers, when we had the very deadly pandemic and California decided to close its entire hospitality industry. Okay? So that happened in 2021. People believed they had to get vaccines due to the mandates, or else they would lose their jobs and their careers. Some people stood up to that and then lost their jobs and their careers. And I feel very bad for those people. Other people accepted the mandates and groveled and bowed before the power of the state. And we watched story after story come out in the mainstream press about how Joe Biden was this and that and everything else. And we don't need to rehash all of the Biden administration, but it was fake. It was illegitimate. And rather than recognizing those things and standing up for ourselves and our country, instead we groveled, because it turns out that a lot of people on quote unquote our side are, despite their conservative branding and their Republican voting record, are nonetheless statists, which makes them collectivists, which makes them leftists. And we are unwilling to recognize things like that, even while we are being governed by people who are totally illegitimate. Our founders would have rolled over in their graves to know what's going on right now and to know how the American people are reacting. And I made the argument last January that what we were going to see throughout that year was an obvious media narrative that suggested there was no way in the world that Joe Biden or Kamala could possibly win. It ended up being Kamala, of course. And that no matter what, that means that Donald Trump would be announced the winner. And that would not make the election real. The election would still be fake. And it was actually the Uniparty regime's best bet to declare Donald Trump the winner and then begin immediately the same sort of subversion that we saw in 2017. And that is exactly what we have witnessed, because our elections are fake. Now, we're going to get into this executive order. And I think that the executive order is fine. We talked a little bit about this on Monday. Donald Trump, in his role as president, can use the full powers of his office and do so perfectly and still not fix elections, because the president of the United States ultimately does not control elections at the state level. And if we are going back to the original Constitution, which I do believe we are doing, the people don't actually directly elect the president in the first place. They elect representatives in their state, and those representatives serve as electors to elect a president and then separately a vice president, which is another reason not to believe that the person serving as VP carries the same legitimacy that Donald Trump does. He doesn't. Okay. I've said for years now that I think the goal of all this is to take us back to that original Constitution. And I believe that is proving true over time. I believe that the pattern, that the reality that emerges fits that pattern and suggests that we are still headed at top speed in that direction. And if that's the case, then we have to analyze things through the understanding of what the original Constitution was intended to produce and what it actually meant and the way that our processes actually work. Okay. And so we have Donald Trump doing things like fixing voter ID. Again, we're going to get into that. But the point I want to make crystal clear is that at no time last year did we resolve our fake elections, nor did we convince the American people that our elections are fake. And instead, what happened is the worst case scenario, as I described it throughout the year. Donald Trump would be announced the winner by the television, and then immediately everyone who knew that our elections were fake would immediately roll over and simply say, well, I guess maybe they're not that fake if Donald Trump won. And it's funny because we actually had people on Badlands doing that the day after and then suggesting that because Trump won in 2024, maybe 2020 wasn't stolen either, except for the fact that the 2024 elections were blatantly stolen in multiple states. Now, the presidential race might not have been stolen, but there was no way for the regime to have been able to steal it. And I don't mean that they didn't have enough control over the system, or they couldn't have produced the numbers, or they couldn't have gotten the TV to say that Kamala had won the fake election. That's not what I mean. I mean that no one would have believed it. The American people would have immediately rejected that election as fake. So there was no way that they could actually play that card unless they were willing to watch the rest of their system collapse. I said, for a year, this is what they will do. They will fill out down ballot races in the House, in the Senate, in state and local levels with uniparty controllable candidates. And that's what they did. And then they would use all their levers of power to subvert the incoming Trump administration. And that's what they're doing. And they would use lawfare to attempt to ride it out for the next 4 years. And that's what they're doing as well. Now, none of that is to say I think they're going to be effective at any of that. I don't think they are. But our elections aren't fixed. And as we'll see in a second, there was an election last night. And we're being told that election was real. And that it was actually the fault of the voters for not turning up to win that fake election for Republicans. All of it is preposterous nonsense. And it should be noted that the resistance to fixing our elections, forget about the leftists, the real, the people who admit that they're leftists, the people who actually went out and voted for Kamala, all 20 million or 25 million or 30, 40 million, whatever it was. Certainly wasn't 75 million. Okay. Forget about them. The resistance to fixing our elections, the most powerful resistance to fixing our elections, comes directly from the conservative establishment and from lifelong Republican voters who, because of the R next to his name, have supported Donald Trump, at least in the 2016 election, the first term, and the 2020 election, and then the 2024 election cycle. And for many of them, it was only those periods and not up until Donald Trump became the nominee in the fake campaign right after the assassination event. That's where the resistance is coming from. The Republican establishment and people who are actually Trump supporters who believe themselves to be awake by virtue of them supporting Trump and supporting the mainstream conservative, quote unquote, influencers and podcasters online. That's why our elections aren't fixed, because no one's demanding it. Why is no one demanding it? Well, we're all just hoping that Donald Trump keeps doing what he's doing, and then J.D. Vance can be our new ruler in 2028. Everyone is prepared to grovel forever. And It's not going to work, and we cannot allow that to happen, which is why we actually need to tell the truth about these things. And I would encourage people to go back and listen to that episode from early 2024. Here is the episode. I'm dropping the link in the chat. It's called Lose the Training Wheels. And you will hear these arguments made, and I argue that to convince people that they absolutely must vote in a fake election is not only immoral, it is a recipe for the entire thing backfiring in our faces. And that was exactly right. And this is what it is to get the hose again. And we will see how much more we need to get the hose. But let's go to Trump's executive order. And let me just reiterate, no matter how perfectly Donald Trump does his job as president, our fake elections need to be reckoned with by the American people at the state and local levels. And that requires people understanding how truly fake our elections are. And it's not just about illegal aliens voting in our elections. It's not just about the censorship that manipulated the elections. It's about the fact that the system itself is incapable of producing legitimacy. And people don't want to deal with that because they are statists. And they want to believe that the people they're obeying have the will and consent of the American people to rule them. And I guess there's a certain theory that would suggest that will and consent is actually given by the refusal to resist their rule. And resisting their rule was the way to nullify their unconstitutional behavior, according to those in the founding era. We don't do that now. We just hope for another election. Another fake election is always around the corner. And that is pretty convenient for the regime, is it not? We had an election in November. Now we have another election last night, and then we have another election next week. And then a few weeks after that, I'm sure we'll have another election. And then the fall, we have off-year elections. And then we go right into primary season for the 2026 midterms. And so there are elections in the spring and the fall. You just have to do it 2 or 3 times a year and get people to all agree that it's absolutely necessary. We win this seat or this Supreme Court seat or this state Senate race. And I'm not saying that those offices in a functioning system wouldn't be important. They would be important. But these elections are spaced out and designed to keep people in the constant cycle of voting and believing that their solutions are going to come from the state via voting. That is not how any of this is going to be solved. And Donald Trump has done absolutely everything in his power and continues to wake people up to this reality. Unfortunately, his own supporters are the most resistant. Preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections. Despite pioneering self-government, the United States now fails to enforce basic and necessary election protections employed by modern developed nations, as well as those still developing. India and Brazil, for example, are tying voter identification to a biometric database, while the United States largely relies on self-attestation for citizenship. In tabulating votes, Germany and Canada require use of paper ballots, counted in public by local officials, which substantially reduces the number of disputes as compared to the American patchwork of voting methods that can lead to basic chain of custody problems. Further, while countries like Denmark and Sweden sensibly limit mail-in voting to those unable to vote in person and do not count late arriving votes regardless of the date of postmark, many American elections now feature, I have no idea how that happened. Wow. Sorry, apologies. My screen just expanded more than I've ever seen it expand. It wasn't even a zoom in. I don't know what that was. Let's continue. Many American elections now feature mass voting by mail, with many officials accepting ballots without postmarks or those received well after Election Day. Free, fair, and honest elections unmarred by fraud, errors, or suspicion are fundamental to maintaining our constitutional republic. The right of American citizens to have their votes properly counted and tabulated without illegal dilution is vital to determining the rightful winner of an election. Under the Constitution, state governments must safeguard American elections in compliance with federal laws that protect Americans' voting rights and guard against dilution by illegal voting, discrimination, fraud, and other forms of malfeasance and error. Yet the United States has not adequately enforced federal election requirements that, for example, prohibit states from counting ballots received after Election Day or prohibit non-citizens from registering to vote. Federal law establishes a uniform election day across the nation for federal elections. It is the policy of my administration to enforce those statutes and require that votes be cast and received by the election date established in law. As the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit recently held in Republican National Committee v. Wetzel from last year, those statutes set, quote, the day by which ballots must be both cast by voters and received by state officials. Yet numerous states failed to comply with those laws by counting ballots received after Election Day. This is like allowing persons who arrive 3 days after Election Day, perhaps after a winner has been declared, to vote in person at a former voting precinct, which would be absurd. Of course, he's right. That would be absurd. Several federal laws prohibit foreign nationals from registering to vote or voting in federal elections. Yet states fail adequately to vet voter citizenship, and in recent years, the Department of Justice has failed to prioritize and devote sufficient resources for enforcement of these provisions. Even worse, the prior administration actively prevented states from removing aliens from their voter lists. And again, this executive order is making the case that our elections are held outside the bounds of the law. These are unlawful elections, which means they are not elections. They cannot confer legitimacy, and the people imagining that they can are not only grievously mistaken to the point where it is a threat to the union of states we have here, or however else you would like to describe it, a threat to our nation's survival as Americans. Additionally, federal laws such as the National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act require states to maintain an accurate and current statewide list of every legally registered voter in the state. And the Department of Homeland Security is required to share database information with states upon request so they can fulfill this duty. Maintaining accurate voter registration lists is a fundamental requirement in protecting voters from having their ballots voided or diluted by fraudulent votes. Federal law prohibits foreign nationals from participating in federal, state, or local elections by making any contributions or expenditures. But foreign nationals and non-governmental organizations have taken advantage of loopholes in the law's interpretation, spending millions of dollars through conduit contributions and ballot initiative-related expenditures. This type of foreign interference in our elections process undermines the franchise and the right of American citizens to govern their republic. Now, a lot of people have noted online that they believe Donald Trump has, with this part of the executive order, gone after the influence of AIPAC. Now, I'm not sure if the influencers online making this case are doing so to go viral, and if so, whatever. They may have some sort of point, but I'm not sure that's the primary influence that AIPAC has. And if it wasn't AIPAC interfering in campaigns or supporting campaigns with lobbying money from a foreign organization, there would still be many other ways that influence would still run in large part America's government. The influence goes much deeper than campaign contributions to various congressmen. And, all of them include the idea that Donald Trump got all this money, as if Donald Trump needs money for campaigns. The whole thing is so silly. And I don't mean that case is so silly. I just mean the idea that Donald Trump is ever doing something for campaign contributions and then doing as those campaign contributors ask him to do. I think all of that is rather ridiculous. And we've seen it. We've seen claims to that effect many times over the last however many years, particularly by those parts of the GOP establishment that were supporting Ron DeSantis and others in the primaries. A lot of the Maha people took that path when it comes to Donald Trump taking $1 million to his inaugural committee in 2016 from pharma, and that's what made him roll out the vaccine program. They basically accused him of promoting a widespread American genocide on the basis of $1 million to his inaugural committee in 2016, as though he went out and solicited that money and made handshake deals. Oh, yeah, I'll poison all these people so I can make another 0.001% of my fortune. These people, man. Above all, elections must be honest and worthy of the public trust. That requires voting methods that produce a voter verifiable paper record, allowing voters to efficiently check their votes to protect against fraud or mistake. Election integrity standards must be modified accordingly. It is the policy of my administration to enforce federal law and to protect the integrity of our election process. So, citizenship requirements. He goes through a list of various methods to ensure that the people casting votes in federal elections are actual American citizens. Will any of that actually work? What are the mechanisms of enforcement? Well, there is the threat of DOJ prosecution, which is named later in the executive order, and the threat to cut off funding. And unfortunately, I don't believe, and I'm open to being wrong about this, but I don't believe there's any way that he can actually guarantee that the states will abide by these provisions. If they are willing to risk their funding, knowing that they can just get funding from outside sources, like they did in 2020, when Mark Zuckerberg donated $400+ million to election processes to fortify our elections in the face of the very deadly pandemic throughout 2020, buying off election judges, setting up the mail-in drop boxes. I think they had the mobile, what do they call them? The mobile voting centers. I can't remember. They had a particular catchy name, but they basically have an RV where you could go and cast your absentee ballot and they would just collect it for you. Mark Zuckerberg paid off local officials and then had clawback provisions in the contracts. So if they took that money, put that money in their bank account, bought a car, whatever, or the city spent that money on whatever the city would spend the money on, maybe it was election processes, maybe it was something else. It's probable that a lot of that was just payoffs. And then they didn't produce the results that were demanded from the Center for Tech and Civic Life who operated the program. Then they had clawback provisions so they could get that money back. And who would have to foot those bills? Well, the taxpayers would have to foot those bills. So they produced the outcomes desired. And we saw how that went. And again, to make it 100% clear, I believe that all of this was monitored, captured, caught, etc., documented. I believe it's probably all in court cases that have been ongoing and or finished back in 2020 and 2021 and then just kept under wraps for these last 5 years, 4.5 years. I fully believe this stuff is going to be taken care of. Okay. So don't take any of this stuff as me blackpilling in some way. What a concept that has kind of lost its cachet since the fake election of 2024. I mean, what's even the point of talking about that anymore? It's like people just don't want to ever feel bad about how things are going. It's like, well, I'm going to solve the problems by cheerleading. Hey, when has a cheerleader ever helped a football team win a game? Do cheerleaders catch the touchdown passes? No. Do they run the ball up the field? No. Do they sack the quarterback? No. They entertain fans on the sideline and have absolutely nothing to do with the action whatsoever. As do the cheerleaders online. Let us continue. Providing other assistance to states to verify eligibility. And he goes through a list here as well. Improving the Election Assistance Commission. I thought this was interesting. Within 180 days of this order, the Election Assistance Commission shall take appropriate action to review and, if appropriate, recertify voting systems under the new standards established under subsection B1 of this section, and to rescind all previous certifications of voting equipment based on prior standards. Rescind all certifications of voting equipment based on prior standards and then recertify everything according to the law. Now, we know just another element of how fake our elections are is that the systems were not certified. And I would just suggest as a possible reason for that, the people doing the certifications did not want to go ahead and do the certifications because that would further involve them in another fraud in our elections. The fraudulent certification of systems that were not actually certifiable. And again, in the Fox versus Dominion lawsuit that we were told was settled for $787 million and led to the firing of Tucker Carlson, so ridiculous, who's now back under Murdoch Media as part of Red Seat Ventures, by the way. $787 million. In the discovery documents, in Dominion's discovery documents, in that case, it shows that Dominion was aware that their elections could not produce reliably accurate, certifiable results. And that was also attested to by the country's foremost expert on election systems, J. Alex Halderman, in his report. And that was part of a Georgia case, Curling v. Raffensperger, since 2019. Okay? So election after election after election is held under these systems that are knowingly unable or known to be unable to deliver reliable, accurate, certifiable results. If you don't think our elections are fake, even though the courts have it recorded that the systems can't produce reliable results, I don't know what to tell you. Okay? At some point, we got to accept those elections are not elections. Whatever they are, they're not elections. What they are is collective psyops. We are participating in our own hoodwinking when we attribute realness and legitimacy to fake elections. At some point, we just have to accept that we are hoodwinking ourselves. It's funny, I was talking about this on Substack yesterday. In my Substack post, I quoted the band Mad Season, which was members of Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and I think maybe one other band from the Seattle grunge era. In a song called River of Deceit, Lane Staley of Alice in Chains sings, "Our pain is self-chosen." And I think that is where we are when it comes to our elections. Let us continue. Prosecuting election crimes. Now, here's an important part because we haven't seen too many election crimes actually get prosecuted. To protect the franchise of American citizens and their right to participate in fair and honest elections, the Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to enter into information sharing agreements to the maximum extent possible with the chief state election official or multi-member agency of each state. These agreements shall aim to provide the Department of Justice with a detailed information on all suspected violations of state and federal election laws discovered by state officials, including information on individuals who registered or voted despite being ineligible, or who registered multiple times. And this goes along with the illegal aliens as well. They have the motor voter laws where illegal aliens, when they sign up for driver's licenses, which they also shouldn't be allowed to have, are registered to vote. You might wonder, hey, is that why all those states made it so that they could get driver's licenses? Because if we tie voter registration to getting a driver's license and there's no citizenship check on the driver's license or the voter registrations, well, then we've got all these additional voter registries that we can use. And if anything goes wrong, it's the illegal aliens' fault. And who can even find them? It's incredible. And it's worth further mentioning, especially if you were not a person who was listening to my podcast throughout last year, that the concern is not that illegal aliens are going themselves to polling locations and entering their votes on the machines or writing them down or sending in mail-in votes or any of that, okay? It's that the collection of illegal alien votes that they are never going to try to vote are a knowable quantity for people with access to voter rolls. And the states have public-private partnerships like with Rock the Vote, for instance, and other voter registry organizations. And those private organizations have access to voter registries. So with some relatively simple analysis with the technological state of things right now, they can figure out the collection of voters who don't ever expect to receive a ballot and don't ever expect to go down to the polling station and vote. And they have hundreds of thousands or millions of these in some states. And a state like California that intentionally sends out mail-in ballots to all registered voters, active, inactive, illegal aliens, doesn't matter. If you're in that voter roll, you're going to receive a ballot. Well, they know exactly where those are going. So they can either A, stop them from being sent out in the first place, or B, if they want the record of them being sent out, they can simply go collect them. And then those ballots are cast in the name of illegal alien voters, and the Uniparty is receiving the ballots, monitoring the ballots, counting the ballots, and then defending the process in the aftermath. They control every step of the election process and have set the election process up to facilitate cellibly, provably, quote unquote, legitimate elections for anyone who might ever question it, but they don't really let you question it. They don't really let you check. And we saw in the aftermath of the 2020 election that there was, first and foremost, an effort to not allow anyone to check. And then once people began to check, a scramble to produce the necessary ballots to destroy various forms of evidence, etc. Let us continue. So the Attorney General is going after the registered or voted, people who registered or voted despite being ineligible or who registered multiple times, those who committed election fraud, those who provided false information on voter registration or other election forms, those who intimidated or threatened voters or election officials, or otherwise engaged in unlawful conduct to interfere in the election process. And there was, here we are, improving security of voting systems. To improve the security of all voting equipment and systems used to cast ballots, tabulate votes, and report results, the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all appropriate actions to the extent permitted and by 42 U.S. Code 5195C and all other applicable law so long as the Department of Homeland Security maintains the designation of election infrastructure as critical infrastructure to prevent all non-citizens from being involved in the administration of any federal election, including by accessing election equipment, ballots, or any other relevant materials used in the conduct of any federal election. And that was a big deal. Election infrastructure as critical infrastructure. Will Homeland Security maintain that designation? Perhaps. I don't know how that's going to go. I actually don't have any opinion on how that even should go, although I don't think there should be a Department of Homeland Security. I don't think that the Patriot Act and the response to 9/11 was something that we desperately need to hold on to. It would be like holding on to the COVID response. So, to the extent that that is going to be maintained as critical infrastructure, if the Department of Homeland Security is going to claim that's critical infrastructure, then they actually need to follow through and do their jobs to protect that critical infrastructure. And they have not done that. If they have done that, we either A, don't know about it because those efforts have been kept behind the scenes, or the results of those efforts have been kept behind the scenes, or B, I forgot what B was. Oh, man. There's just so much. What was I going to say? I don't know. CISA did not. CISA had to. I think that I was going down this direction in one way or another. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency under the Department of Homeland Security, had to acknowledge J. Alex Halderman's report in, I think, 2022 or 2023 was when they actually submitted their acknowledgement of that. And with it, they hired a group called, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Midas, to dispute the J. Alex Halderman report. And it did a terrible job of doing it. But CISA even eventually had to agree that the election systems were incapable of producing reliable results. And it was just another one of those whoops reactions from the deep state. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall, in coordination with the Election Assistance Commission and to the maximum extent possible, review and report on the security of all electronic systems used in the voter registration and voting process. The Secretary of Homeland Security, as the head of the designated Sector Risk Management Agency under we don't need to read the U.S. Code 652A, whatever, in coordination with the Election Assistance Commission, shall assess the security of all such systems to the extent they are connected to or integrated into the internet, and report on the risk of such systems being compromised through malicious software and unauthorized intrusions into the system. I was told that our election systems are not connected to the internet. And they continue to tell that to the American public. And a big part of the American public continues to believe that, even though it is indisputably true that the election systems are connected to the internet. They are connected to networks within the election centers that are then themselves connected to the internet. But we are told, oh, it's not the machine connected to the internet. Oh, they're air gapped. Oh, got it. It's also crazy. It is so crazy that anyone actually believes we have legitimate elections. This executive order is like scratching the surface. And again, that's no slight on Donald Trump. It just really is just scratching the surface. Preventing foreign interference and unlawful use of federal funds. The Attorney General, in consultation with the Secretary of Treasury, shall prioritize enforcement of 52 U.S. Code 30121 and other appropriate laws to prevent foreign nationals from contributing or donating in U.S. elections. And you know what? This might have been the section, this and the other section are kind of along the same lines, but this may have been the section that I was seeing go semi-viral today and saying that this is going to keep AIPAC out of our elections. Well, Maybe it will, but we already have Executive Order 13848 that went directly to the foreign interference in American elections. And hopefully we will see that acted upon in greater ways as we continue embracing this strange future. Biden put out an Executive Order 14019 in March of 2021 promoting access to voting. Trump revoked that order, but he has also demanded that the heads of the agencies and the EAC cease any agency action to continue pursuing compliance with that Biden executive order. And he wants full reports on what that compliance actually consisted of over these last few years. What did each of these agencies tasked with promoting access to voting? All the agencies, that was what the Biden executive order was designed to do. They wanted to promote as much voting in as many possible methods as they could after having stolen the 2020 election. So Trump wants to not only make sure that the agencies halt any actions toward compliance with that executive order that are now underway, he also wants a record of absolutely everything that was done and presumably who by, so that all of that can be reviewed for compliance under the Constitution and with our actual election laws to see whether or not the bureaucratic administrative deep state was working outside the law to continue promoting the theft of American elections. And there was one other section that I wanted to find here. Here we go. I forgot to highlight this when I was using my semi-trusty highlighter app earlier. This is under the Improving the Election Assistance Commission. The Election Assistance Commission shall initiate appropriate actions to amend the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines 2.0 and issue other appropriate guidance establishing standards for voting systems to protect election integrity. The amended guidelines and other guidance shall provide that voting systems should not use a ballot in which a vote is contained within a barcode or quick response code, that's QR code, in the vote counting process, except where necessary to accommodate individuals with disabilities, and should provide a voter verifiable paper record to prevent fraud or mistake. Now, in my opinion, that's, I guess, a little bit helpful, but again, not going nearly far enough. Now, I don't know if this is the extent of Trump's powers along these lines because states are tasked by the Constitution with handling their own elections and election processes. But the situation as it exists now is when you vote on a touchscreen, a receipt for that vote is printed. And this is the experience I've had in California and in Texas. And then you feed that receipt into another machine and that counts it. And that receipt counts as your paper ballot, even though that is not at all what people are asking for when they want hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots, okay? You can say paper ballot, and by the broad definition of paper ballot, that receipt counts as a paper ballot, so that means we have paper ballots in those elections, but that is not a paper ballot. That is not what election integrity experts are talking about when they're talking about paper ballots. And then the other part is with those machine voting systems, you could look at your ballot and say, yes, I chose this candidate. I chose this candidate. I said no to this measure. I said no to this measure. I said no to this measure. Okay? You can go through and check what it says on your ballot. But if what the machine you're feeding it into counts is a barcode or a QR code, you have no way of knowing that the words printed on that ballot or your entries into the touchscreen system are actually represented in that barcode or QR code that will be counted. And that's the problem with these systems. There's actually no way to verify that. And this is helpful along those lines, but it doesn't get us all the way there. And having these voting machines still be a necessary component of our elections means that we cannot ever assume that the reported results accurately reflect the will and intent of the voters. And without that, there's nothing. There is no legitimacy to be gained from elections run with these processes. So again, Donald Trump can be doing his job perfectly and to the full extent of his powers as president of the United States of America. And we can still have fake elections, okay? We have to get it out of our heads that Donald Trump is fixing everything just because the TV keeps saying he's fixing everything. That's not a slight against Trump. It's a reality of the situation. And unfortunately, the reality of the situation is being ignored in favor of the cheerleading about the headlines and about what we're being shown on Fox News. And Stephen A. Smith and Bill Maher, they're saying such based and red-pilled things. Look at what the normies are hearing. Look at what those leftists are hearing. Yes, they're hearing messaging that is going to take them from the Uniparty left to the Uniparty right for a little while at least. And what does that do? It does absolutely nothing. And it's funny because, as I said before, some of the heat that I took last year, sometimes directly and sometimes just with being totally frozen out, right? And of course, being the devolution guys, we've been accused for 5 years from various parts of the Q community of like undermining and subverting the entire thing because we were honest about Joe Biden's illegitimacy. And we believe that John put together a pretty well evidenced way that whatever was happening behind the scenes was shown to us, shown to the American public, and comports with the Constitution. So, gosh, forgive us for that. I forgot what I was even going to say as the complaint. I'm going on too many tangents today. Let's just, I'm going to play one more reminder from Donald Trump about the status of our elections, including the 2024 election.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular.
Have you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
Well, if you believe the whole thing is ridiculous. That's Donald Trump in response to the reported results of the 2024 election. What are we supposed to say about it? Do we want things to be fixed? This is what I was going to say regarding some of the blowback I received from people in the Q community. And by the way, there are influencers out there that I still see most people following and cheerleading along with who used to write to John Harold in his direct messages asking John to shut me up. I was going to make it so that people wouldn't vote in our fake elections and we would therefore lose a fake election. They were demanding, first of all, John is not my boss. John is my friend. And I do respect John. And if John asked me to cool it on something, I don't know what I would do. I would try to have an honest conversation with him about it. And if push came to shove, I would just keep saying it, and then, things would be what they are. John and I, before Badlands ever started, had a conversation where it was said explicitly by me in no uncertain terms, I will never curtail anything I say to be part of a network. And he said, good, I don't want you to. And at no point has he ever attempted to curtail anything I have said on Badlands. Okay? Just to make that 100% clear. But people who are like respected members of the truth community were trying to get John to silence me. Okay? So keep that in mind. And it's very funny because, of course, they're all the biggest fans in the world of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. And Michael Flynn's entire thing is local action has national impact. All right? That's the opposite of cheer for the television while Donald Trump solves your problems. Total opposite. I'm going to try to, I think maybe I will try to actually do a podcast with General Flynn. I don't know if he'll do it or not. He just did one with G Money the other day, though, so maybe he will. And he's gone on with the Eye of the Storm guys and stuff. We'll see. But I would like to ask him about that, because the elections are one of the things that has to be handled locally. In fact, really everything needs to be handled locally. And if I am correct about my big picture assessment of what Trump's ultimate goals are, which is to unwind this process back to at least the original Constitution, if not before, then it is necessary to take us back to that point. First of all, because our elections will be totally different, but also because our federal government was never intended to do all of these things. Okay? And so if we unwind to that point and we dismantle the federal bureaucracy, the federal government will be left doing very, very few things. If we are on the path to that, we should assume that however much we can see ourselves on the path to that, they are much further down that path. It is entirely possible that to all important, for all intents and purposes, at least the important ones, the federal government's been dismantled already and isn't actually doing anything. And we wouldn't even recognize it because we continue to invest our time and energy into the TV show, while we are seeing perpetual psyops, even the ones from our side. And we're like, it's good that we attacked the Houthis. Did we? It is a deep, deep morass. But the truth is, the limits to our knowledge are very local, and the limits to our actions must also be very local. And it's amazing that the people who, and I use this term with no disrespect intended toward Michael Flynn, but people who worship Michael Flynn aren't invested in local action. They're not even invested in understanding the principles of local action or suggesting that, hey, all our problems are not going to be solved by Donald Trump just because he was declared by the television as the winner of a fake election in 2024. The adults are back in the room. Unbelievable. Anyway, I don't want to sound like I'm bitching, and I might sound like I'm bitching, and I accept that complaint. I do believe it's justified, and I do believe that these things have to be said by someone, and if I don't see anyone else saying them, well then, who's going to do it? So I have to take it upon myself again. Okay, Daily Mail. This is from yesterday. Trump makes ultimate move to combat election fraud with sweeping executive order. Donald Trump signed an executive order making radical changes to ensure elections are free, fair, and honest, and possibly taking millions off the voter rolls. Okay? And so the concern here, as they were, I think that there was, hold on one second. I think there was an original, like a headline from this morning that talked about how he was attempting with this executive order to end the Democrat Party. Or maybe that's just the reaction here. but they're suggesting that he is potentially depriving 21 million Americans of the right to vote through all of these various methods as listed in the executive order. The Trump administration says the sweeping executive order is intended to bolster the integrity of American elections. The move would put a citizenship question on federal voting forms, though the move will likely face challenges like many other Trump executive actions because many states have broad voter protection laws. Well, that is not a well-constructed sentence. Trump famously believes the 2020 election was stolen from him, often calling the contest rigged, and many of his top lieutenants in his administration believe the same. And of course, he believes the same about the 2024 election because the 2024 election was fake. Sod this in the chat, $20 on a Rumble rant, says, never shut up. Don't ever let them silence you. My contribution to the cause and APL forever. And we know what that means. And thank you for that. And I really do appreciate the support, guys. And I've been receiving plenty of it online as well. Yeah. Things are probably going to head in a different direction relatively soon. You know, we'll discuss that later. Okay, let's get back to the challenges. So the Daily Mail is telling us that these things are going to be challenged. They're fretting that Donald Trump is essentially trying to end the Democrat Party through these changes to the election system. And that is a blatant admission that they're stealing elections. This is Democracy Docket, the website of Marc Elias, formerly of Perkins Coie, one of the law firms targeted by Donald Trump, and we're going to get to more of that in a little bit. Trump order could disenfranchise millions of voters. The order attempts to wrest control from the states, which are primarily responsible for regulating and administering elections for federal office while punishing states that do not comply. It also attempts to make registering to vote more difficult. And by more difficult, they mean a citizenship requirement. I should also mention that in terms of the voter registration, the voter rolls, the voter registries need to be emptied completely to zero and then built back up, if at all, built back up from nothing with people who meet all of the eligibility requirements. Perhaps better than that is just proof of eligibility on the day of election in person at the voting center for the voter. Small voting centers, decentralized as much as possible. Everything in those voting centers recorded on video, live streamed, kept for posterity. All right. But the Scott Pressler effort to register as many voters as possible, that helps the election fraud system. And that was another one of the things that people couldn't deal with me saying in 2024. What do you mean he's our hero? No, he's not. Okay. Another problem with this very first paragraph from the Democracy Docket. They're talking about Donald Trump wresting control from the states over our elections. The first piece of legislation proposed by the illegitimate House of Representatives in 2021 to be signed by the illegitimate President Joe Biden in 2021, H.R. 1, was about nationalizing elections. And in the COVID relief packages, the Uniparty attempted to nationalize our elections. They wanted universal mail-in balloting. All across the country, they wanted everyone to get mail-in ballots. And there were a couple of other things that they wanted to do across the entire nation. H.R. 1 was intended to essentially federalize our elections and remove the control over our elections from the states. And now they're blaming Trump for any effort in that direction. Incredible. And this, by the way, isn't an effort in that direction. It is just an effort to enforce federal laws already on the books. The order attempts to The Democrat election lawyer Marc Elias was among those who said he will sue over Trump's order. And Democrat election officials quickly decried the order. So Marc Elias, election lawfare attorney, one of the people who was most responsible for preserving and fortifying the 2020 steal, one of the people listed by name in Rico Grande, is going to be contesting Trump's executive order on election integrity. Trump's executive order is unlawful, Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold said in a statement. It would prevent eligible Americans from exercising their sacred right to vote. The Trump administration is weaponizing the federal government and making it harder for voters to fight back at the ballot box. This is not a statute, Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes told Democracy Docket. And by the way, Jenna Griswold and Adrian Fontes are both key figures from the 2020 election steal and the preservation of the rigged and illegitimate election system in Colorado and in Arizona. Fontes says this is an edict by fiat from the executive branch, and so every piece of it can be challenged through the regular judicial process. And good luck, Tommy. That doesn't mean that it's going to work or that whatever the courts decide is actually going to play, because unfortunately for these people, the entire institution of judicial supremacy and judicial review seems to be crumbling, which is a great thing. But what is most disturbing is the attitude behind it. And that is that it appears as though this is another one of the administration's building blocks in an attempt to avoid having to face the voters in 2026, Fontes added. I genuinely believe that the Trump administration wants to cancel the 2026 elections so that he and his party can stay in power. And we have to fight like hell against that by every means available. Now, again, we don't have elections. We have fake elections. We have psyops and delusions that we participate in, collectively affirming this is how we give power to the people who rule over us illegitimately as the result of prior fake elections. This is how we give them back more of the same power. We tell them, yes, you can continue to rule over us in the same ways, but we would like you to change the branding on how you communicate it to us from Coke to Pepsi, essentially. The Trump administration claimed the executive order was necessary to prevent election fraud, specifically non-citizens voting in federal elections, which is exceptionally rare in U.S. elections. No, it isn't. The quote-unquote proof of that happening might be exceptionally rare, but that is because the system is designed to eliminate the proof as the ballot goes through the system. And they say that that is about protecting voter privacy. And just one more word, by the way, on the cancellation of the 2026 elections. I said we do not have real elections. It would not then, therefore, mean anything to cancel 2026 elections. Not that I think that that is what's in our future, though I don't care either way. We don't have elections to cancel. If we all agree that our elections are fake and that we should not then have another one and waste the time and the energy and the resources on a fake election in the 2026 midterms because we have thought our way out of the collective psyop and delusion, then it's not going to be about Trump canceling elections as though this is the end of democracy, despite the fact that the same people complaining about this are the ones who supported Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor in Ukraine, when he canceled Ukraine's elections. There is nothing to cancel, and we should not want more elections, okay? Elections are not the solution. If there's a way that we can make our elections legitimate between now and 2026, then all right, I guess. Let's have elections at the local level and the state level. What we really need to do is eliminate the administrative, bureaucratic deep state from each one of the states. And oh, by the way, from most localities, if you're a city of any substantial size, they steal school board elections, okay? The people who are installing the race and gender nonsense and the vaccine mandates and promoting all of this stuff are also put in their place through fake elections. Donald Trump can't fix that with an executive order. If the country wakes up to these problems and decides we shouldn't have elections anymore, well, then fine. Cancel the 2026 midterms. Who gives a shit? Who wants to spend their time on this stuff? And by the way, that part's worth mentioning as well. I made this argument in the podcast from January last year. Let's say we have 1,000 people, and each one of those 1,000 people devotes 10 hours to trying to win a fake election over the course of the 10 months leading up to the general election. Okay. And this is the example I gave because the numbers are easy. And it was January. The election was in November. It worked for that time frame. But consider 10 months before the election, 1,000 people, each one of those people puts in 10 hours per month. So that's 2.5 hours, 4 weekends a month. Okay. So they've worked 10 hours a month times 10 months. That's 100 times 1,000 people. That's 100,000 man hours devoted to supporting election processes in hopes of winning a fake election. Is that a valuable expenditure of people's time? I would argue to you that no, it is not. Nor are all the man hours that it takes to earn the money that is donated to these political parties in service of winning fake elections, but really in service of them laundering money to their friends and them buying election races, buying races around the country. They agree before the election about who the winner is going to be. Elections are not how our leaders are chosen. I wish it was another way, but it's not another way. And we should grow up about it. Let us continue. Trump's order in general attempts to make remaining registered to vote more difficult. It directs the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, an agency created by Congress to operate without direct control from the White House, to require eligible voters to provide documentary proof of their citizenship when registering through a federal registration form. The change would prevent Americans who lack easy access to documents such as passports from registering to vote through the National Mail Voter Registration Form, which was originally created to make registering to vote more accessible. Now, if Marc Elias's group Democracy Docket is not a quote-unquote white hat psyop to wake up the normies, it's doing a damn good job of admitting what their processes are and how they intended to manipulate the system. They've created this process to make registering to vote more accessible. And accessible is one of those words that they use. It's a euphemism. They want to make it easier to register to vote or easier to register someone else to vote if it's not even the person registering themselves to vote. Getting rid of the motor voter registration laws, great step. Our state's going to do that? Well, it's up to the states, unfortunately. Maybe there's something the federal government can do. I really highly doubt that. They are concerned that actual Americans are not going to be able to register to vote? We've all heard the same argument made about voter ID. It's impossible for poor black old women to get driver's licenses. No, it isn't. When has that ever been difficult? So crazy. I mean, we're just in crazy town all the time now, apparently. Let's continue. It directs the U.S. Election Commission Assistance Commission is carefully reviewing the president's executive order and determining the next steps in enhancing the integrity of voter registration in state and federal elections. We also anticipate consulting with state and local election officials. The order also directs that states which accept ballots that arrive after Election Day, a common practice used in states like California, Illinois, and Nevada, would lose federal funds to support their election operations. And it's not a common practice. It's something they've been doing for a few years in a few states. Losing federal funds, again, is some kind of punishment, I guess. But if they keep getting funds in other ways, what's the difference? Imagine the federal government, the American taxpayers, pinned on their backs, this spending to rig our elections. We're paying for ourselves to be propagandized, paying for ourselves to be psyoped. We're paying for our own color revolutions. We're paying for our elections to be stolen. It's incredible. And the order charges Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency and the Department of Homeland Security with using federal databases to review state voter registration lists. As part of this effort, DOJ and DHS can subpoena state records to prove supposed voter registration fraud. Uh-oh. They sound a little bit scared. And it goes on with a couple more complaints, but I don't want to belabor the point on Marc Elias. I have a feeling we're not going to get anywhere near through all. We're not going to get anywhere near getting through all the stuff that I had actually prepared today. So I guess I've made a huge mistake. If you are a fan of Arrested Development, you will know that reference. Maybe I should just see if I can find it really quick. Hold for processing. Arrested Development is an hilarious TV show. I did not know that there was a compilation of all of these. Let's just spend a minute on it.
Meanwhile, March's interview was underway, and Job was getting uncomfortable playing the supportive role.
I just told him that we are this family now, and that career is one thing, but family is forever.
I too have an announcement to make. To prove that no prison can hold me, I will incarcerate myself in the penitentiary that holds my own father, only to escape 24 hours later. No shackles can hold these hands. Say that to them in Spanish.
You really think you can break out of my prison?
You won't even know I was here.
The warden was intrigued, less about the stunt and more about the prison beatings this brash magician was sure to receive.
Well, any press is good press, huh?
Well, that's one of those times that I wish I had watched the video in advance of playing it. Let's just cut to the chase here. Here we go.
I've made a huge mistake.
Oh, man. If you guys are not fans of Arrested Development, then that was absolutely meaningless, and I apologize. All right. So we had an election last night, and this is how the Gateway Pundit is covering it. Shock flip Democrats snatched deep red Pennsylvania Senate seat for the first time since 1978, overturning a district Trump won by 15 points. And here's the thing. The final tally, a measly 482 vote margin. And why? Because Republicans couldn't be bothered to show up. Let's be real. This wasn't stolen. It wasn't rigged. It was handed over on a silver platter by Republicans who didn't even bother to vote. Only 29% of voters showed up. That means over 70% of registered voters did not cast their votes. Many of them Republicans who assume their district is so safe that it'll stay red by default. That kind of complacency just flipped a decades-long Republican seat to a Democrat. What proof do they have of that? One might ask. Well, the answer is zero proof whatsoever. That is just an acceptance of an election result for no reason, and then an emotional reaction blaming the voters for not going out. And then the queen of voter registration, Scott Pressler, said, I asked for help and no one would help us. Meanwhile, Illinois Democrats poured in $100,000 from a PAC. It's frustrating to do all this work while Republicans are busy celebrating and posting on social media. It makes me question if I should continue doing this work. Well, Scott Pressler, the answer is no, you shouldn't, but I get what you mean about questioning it. Why is the Gateway Pundit one of the outlets that was committed to exposing the elements of the rigged and fraudulent election system after the fake and stolen election of 2020, now committed to the idea that our elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and that the results accurately reflect the will and intent of the voters? Now, on a practical level, is it possible that if a bunch more Republicans came to, quote unquote, vote, and that everything else, as it was done in this election, remained the same, we might have gotten a different result? Well, a lot of people would theoretically at least say, okay, well, yeah, of course that's the case. If they didn't cheat harder and more Republicans came out, well, then Republicans would have won. Well, first off, all of this analysis forgets about the Uniparty, and wanting a Republican in that seat in the first place forgets about the Uniparty. If it's just another Uniparty Republican, what difference does it make? No difference. That's the point. We cannot assume that elections are real because the margin was close and the turnout was low. We're going to have a lot of low turnout elections, particularly as the illegitimate, fraudulent election system is dismantled. Okay? If we have voter rolls that are bloated with who knows how many ineligible, inactive, illegal voter registrations, and the system is not ginned up to make use of all those voter registrations in the casting of fake ballots, well, then the turnout number is always going to be low. And if you examine elections around the world that are, like you could go to here, in fact, let's just run the experiment together. I've talked about this stuff enough times on the podcast before that I feel comfortable just restating it, but let's skip that. And instead, we are going to go to, let's even just use the machine's favorite search engine, Google, and see what Google says about this. Here we go. What would be a good one? Low turnout election, Reuters, Venezuela. So this was, you can see these headlines here. Here's another. Venezuela opposition says it must rebuild after heavy election loss. The opposition, of course, is the regime side in Venezuela. Here is one from 2018. Venezuela vote turnout was 32% by 6 p.m. Okay. You can go through all of the countries that are operating in opposition to the regime. Now, you don't have to say anything good about the people running these countries. We can just leave it at them being in opposition to the regime. And in some cases, at least, that has been historically them being in opposition to the United States of America, because, of course, the United States of America was the funding and enforcement arm of the global regime now for like 80 years, or maybe much longer than that. Donald Trump represents a different part of that system for the United States of America. So to the extent that they opposed the USA, I don't think that necessarily applies when Donald Trump is the one actually leading the country. And, this will be something that will be hashed out in the future. But the point is, one of the characteristics of many of these elections held in states around the world that oppose the regime is that they have low turnout in these elections, because the total voter registration is ballooned to some ridiculous figure. And if they're only allowing actual people to vote under a strict, rigidly adhered to system that is intended to produce legitimate results, well, then all of the names on the bloated registration who don't represent actual voters who are motivated to go out and vote, those are going to look like people who didn't turn out. And so the turnout argument is always garbage when you have bloated election rolls, bloated voter rolls, I should say. And that's what we have. Scott Pressler helps to create the bloat in those voter registrations. And it is amazing to see an outlet like the Gateway Pundit arguing that these elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported results accurately reflect the will and intent of the voters. Now, I said we had an election in Florida. This is the Wall Street Journal today. Republicans grow anxious about Florida's special election. Republican political operatives have grown concerned about a special election in Florida, with the race for a solidly red House seat emerging as more competitive than expected, creating a potential headache for the GOP 2 months into President Trump's term. While the party still largely expects candidate Randy Fine, a fiery Florida state lawmaker, to win former Representative Mike Waltz's 6th congressional district seat, the party is rushing ahead of the April 1st election day to reach Republican voters and make sure they turn out. Waltz resigned the seat to become Trump's national security advisor. Trump allies, it says, worry a weak showing in the Florida contest would be read fairly or unfairly as a referendum on the president's record headed into the midterm elections in 2026, when control of the Senate and the House are on the line. All right. So already we are into the narrative seeding process to suggest that the red wave didn't materialize. Sure, Trump got it as a reaction to Biden in 2024, but that was it. And now the people by and large are upset with what Donald Trump is doing, evidenced by the massive rallies for Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the showing up at the town halls, and the resistance to Elon Musk. All of those psyops have been spinning out for the last 2 months. And regardless of whether or not we are fooled by them, and I don't think that certainly this audience is, the American public is hearing these narratives. And they believe these narratives because they still believe the media. And part of the reason they still believe the media is because MAGA supporters, truth community people, Q community people, etc., cannot stop promoting mainstream media headlines in the process of their cheerleading. Hey, look, the media, they're saying nice things about us now. We can trust them again. Hey, let's listen to Bill Maher. It's a clown show. And this is what the clown show does. What do you expect it to produce? We act like the GOP establishment are suddenly all our friends because they are groveling before Trump's power and trying to make it seem like they are our allies. They say nice things about Donald Trump now. They've stopped saying mean things about us. They're focused totally on saying mean things about the leftists, who are the bad guys. The denial of the Uniparty is itself one of the biggest problems that we have, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, does not seem to be going away in the least. And the reason is because people are so conditioned to supporting Republicans that we may well end up being in this stuck in this forever. Here is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis talking about that election coming up next week.
As the candidate that's running there now jeopardize that seat, making it more competitive than what's historically a safe district?
I guess we'll see, right? What I will tell you this. Regardless of the outcome in that, it's going to be a way underperformance from what I won that district by in 22 and what President won it by in November. They're going to try to lay that at the feet of President Trump. That is not a reflection of President Trump. It's a reflection of the specific candidate running in that race. And President Trump, if he were on the ballot in this special election, he would win by 30 points, no question. So the liberal media in Washington and the political press, they're going to try, if this doesn't work out as well, they're going to try to weaponize that against the president. And just as somebody that's been around the block here in Florida on this stuff, I can tell you it's a candidate-specific issue. I think the district is so overwhelmingly Republican that there's literally, it was almost impossible for someone with an R by their name to lose that district. So I would anticipate Republican candidate is still going to be successful. Do I think that they will get even close to the margins that I received or President Trump received? No. Is that a reflection on the president? Absolutely not. It's a reflection of the candidate that's running in that race.
Okay. So that candidate, Randy Fine, is a bad candidate, according to Ron DeSantis, who has not fixed elections in Florida. And you heard him bragging about the size of his victory in 2022 in the fake gubernatorial election in Florida that was meant to launch Ron DeSantis as the better version of Donald Trump. He would have been a national figure throughout that year. The scandal that would have taken down Andrew Gillum had he been governor at that point happened that summer. The finding Andrew Gillum passed out in a hotel room with drug paraphernalia after a night with a gay escort. Ron DeSantis would have won that election, as he did, by, I think, 15 points or something. That would have made him a national figure, and he would have kept that momentum going through the fake primary campaign that he would have been slated to win. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the DeSantis Sims, for months and months after Ron DeSantis had already tanked, we're still saying Ron DeSantis will definitely be the nominee. Ron DeSantis will definitely be the nominee. And it's because that was what was decided by the conservative establishment. By, I should say, the GOP establishment, not conservative, just statists and neoconservative leftists. So Ron DeSantis did absolutely nothing and has done absolutely nothing to fix elections in Florida. And you can talk to Florida election experts like Chris Jersky, and he will tell you that Ron DeSantis has done absolutely nothing. And he's done that with, of course, a similarly illegitimate Republican supermajority. Now, Donald Trump has endorsed Randy Fine, and here is that endorsement of Randy Fine as posted by Randy Fine. He said, this was the 23rd of November last year. Clearly, mom wasted no time once she made it upstairs, and I guess that his mother must have just passed. So condolences to him. Mr. President, God saved you on that day in Butler so that you could save the world. It would be the honor of my life to be one of your foot soldiers. Your confidence is overwhelming, and I will have news to share soon. So this is the guy that Ron DeSantis just said was totally unpalatable to the Republican Party in Florida, and because of that would have a very small victory or potentially a loss. This was Trump's endorsement. I am hearing that America First patriot Randy Fine is considering launching his campaign for Congress in Florida's 6th congressional district. A Harvard-educated, successful businessman and highly respected state legislator, Randy has been an incredible voice for MAGA and the great people of Florida. In Congress, Randy will be an incredible fighter who will work tirelessly with me to stop inflation, grow our economy, secure the border, champion our military and vets, restore American energy dominance, protect our always under siege Second Amendment, and restore peace through strength. Should he decide to enter the race, Randy Fine has my complete and total endorsement. Run, Randy, run. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump is just dropping some kayfabe on us all. Is he just making it up? Is he just kidding around? He doesn't actually mean to endorse Randy Fine. He doesn't actually think Randy Fine's a good candidate. He's just saying nice things about Randy Fine because he knew Randy Fine would be the guy and he was just trying to play 17D chess or whatever. Because Ron DeSantis, of course, is kayfabe. I'm still told all about how Ron DeSantis is kayfabe. And that's another thing that I took an unbelievable amount of heat over, is going after Ron DeSantis when Ron DeSantis was claiming that our elections were legitimate and that Donald Trump and his supporters were clowns. And now Casey DeSantis is running to become the next Florida governor, or intends to do that. Let me see if I can find, there was a video of Ron and Casey a couple of weeks ago, and she is just awful. But Ron wants to hand his office over to Casey DeSantis because he's going to be termed out, and then he wants to run for president in 2028. That is how all of that is lining up. So we have fake elections in Florida, and we have a uniparty in Florida. What is Ron DeSantis saying? If you know those two things and don't ignore them in your analysis, suggesting that all of this is just kayfabe and a clown show and whatever, that Donald Trump is just involved in our hoodwinking on this too, but it's a good hoodwinking because it's from Trump. Okay. So what he's saying is he knows what the system is going to produce. It's going to produce a small win for Randy Fine, potentially, if not a loss. And he wants you to know that he's not saying these things. It's not going to be a reflection on Trump. It's just going to be a reflection on Randy Fine, because if he was going to join in the chorus that's going to say it's a reflection on Trump, well, then MAGA wouldn't like Ron. So Ron is protecting himself while letting everyone know, yep, this is what our fake and rigged election system is going to produce. And remember, a Democrat somehow won the Jacksonville mayoral race, I think in early 2024, maybe late 2023. It was probably the 2023 date. I actually remember an interaction with, I want to say it was this historian that sometimes goes on Bannon. His name is evading my memory right now. But he talked about how he knew how that race was going to be decided and how they decide these things in advance. We are told that all these people moved from the blue states to Ron DeSantis' great state of Florida, the free state of Florida. And all these new Republican registrations had flooded in, and everybody knew that Ron DeSantis was America's governor. And then somehow the Democrats won the mayoral race in Jacksonville in the middle of a massive Republican surge. Makes no sense. It does not make sense. Okay? Our elections are fake. It's not that they're a little bit fake. It's that they're completely and totally rigged and fake. The system produces what the system intends to produce. Everything after that is just a narrative operation to convince the people that whatever their government does is something that they chose. That's what the entire system is about. It is a psyop that we participate in through our addiction to the soap opera and the belief that the state runs our lives and that it is only through the state that our lives can improve. Otherwise, our suffering will increase at their hands. We are participating in our own hoodwinking. Our pain is self-chosen. And I think that will be the name of this episode. I have to write that down so I don't forget. All right. We are not going to get anywhere through what I intended to get through today. Anywhere close to through. I've said that. I've tried to communicate that same idea twice this show, and both times I have flubbed what I was intending to say. It's just one of those days. This is The Hill from Monday. GOP senators warn Trump agenda will be slowed by internal divisions. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has cautioned GOP colleagues that the Senate isn't likely to pass President Trump's border security, energy, and tax agenda until July at the earliest, and some Republican senators are warning the bill could drag well into the fall. What? How? That's not what we were promised. Much of Washington's attention is focused on the rocky path Trump's agenda faces in the House, where Speaker Mike Johnson's slim majority means he can only lose one GOP vote and still pass GOP legislation. Well, the truth is both bodies are illegitimate and neither should be passing any legislation whatsoever. But Republican senators are warning that getting a major package through the Senate will take months longer than has been publicly discussed due to the sheer size of Trump's ambitious agenda and internal Republican divisions over an array of policy questions. How about that? Where are we? Yes. Johnson said in January that the House Republican leaders were targeting April for final passage of a budget reconciliation package that would extend the expiring 2017 tax cuts and address border security, energy reform, and defense spending. Johnson told CNBC in a March 12th interview that he put the reconciliation bill, quote, on a very aggressive timetable for the very important reason that we need to get to the certainty for the business environment as soon as possible. I've put on an aggressive timetable to try and get a vote on the one big, beautiful bill, the reconciliation package, on the House floor before Easter. Easter's on April 20th. If we do that, you're pushing it over to the Senate for them to act upon. It's conceivable you could get this to the president's desk by the end of April or early May, certainly before Memorial Day. But the Senate is not going to get it done. And it appears that there might be members of the House who are not going to get on board with the Donald Trump agenda. Isn't that amazing? That one or two members of the House are going to try to thwart the entire agenda, the big, beautiful bill? What's happening here? It's almost like they're not actually passing legislation. Remember when everyone was like, we need to get the House and the Senate so they can pass Trump's agenda. We need to confirm all the members of the fantasy team so they can pass Trump's agenda. Do we? No one's done anything. Trump has signed executive orders. And Elon Musk has run an information operation to let us know how corrupt the government is. I'm not sure anything else has happened. But we can pretend. We can pretend, just like we pretended for 4 years. All that happened was they passed omnibus spending bills based on unipartisan agreements on what should be put in, must pass legislation to keep the government open, and to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. We've not had a budget in 30 years, okay? The only thing happening is that the government continues to tell the American public that they have figured out ways to keep themselves open, while the money laundering from the regime up top, fed through the federal government and thus pinned on the backs of American quote-unquote taxpayers, that laundering operation continues so that the agenda continues to be implemented. The entire thing is a farce. I mean, I don't know how else to express it. People are like, well, you can't call it fake. It's real. It's happening. I can see it on TV every day. If you say so, let us continue. Just a quick note on this. This is something Chris Jersky pointed out. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Georgia prepares mass cancellation of 455,000 voter registrations. Now, this is meant to look as though it is some big important event. On the left, they're saying, oh, well, this is voter suppression. You're canceling these registrations. On the right, they're cheering, oh, this is a big step toward election integrity. These are just inactive voters that haven't voted in many, many cycles. It's not the full voter registry clearing that needs to be done in Georgia, and election integrity experts will tell you that exact thing. So has the problem been fixed? No, it hasn't. And yet, we are sold this bill of goods that because the Dems are crying, oh, liberal tears, oh, I'll drink them up with my daily Weimar mug. Because the libs are crying and we're owning the libs, we are meant to believe that something is actually getting done to our benefit, and it is not. Sooner or later, we must choose to stop being hoodwinked. It's not even like it's not more depressing to stop getting hoodwinked. People are like, well, if you're not cheering about these things, well, then everything's just going to be negative and pessimistic. Well, no, it's not. The thing we should cheer about more than anything else is that people aren't getting hoodwinked to the same degree. All right? That's what we should be cheering for. But that's not what we're cheering for. We're cheering for headlines from mainstream media outlets. That is mind-blowing to me. So, let us get to the Atlantic kerfuffle over the Signal app. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans. This from Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, a Russia hoaxer, a Trump derangement syndrome. He is inflicted with Trump derangement syndrome and has been from day one. He is a perpetual neocon warmonger, and he was singularly responsible for the suckers and losers hoax. If he is a white hat op meant to wake up the normies, he could not be doing a better job. He is, I don't believe he is that. I do believe he is just downright evil. Let's skip down toward the end of this article. We'll get to his conclusion. A lot of people have already seen many of the text messages and heard a lot of the analysis about the text messages. I don't want to go all the way through that stuff. Again, people have different opinions about this. We'll get to some of the conclusions as we go through the rest of what I have lined up. As I have never seen he says, let's start that over. I have never seen a breach quite like this. It is not uncommon for national security officials to communicate on Signal, but the app is used primarily for meeting planning and other logistical matters, not for detailed and highly confidential discussions of a pending military action. And of course, I've never heard of an instance in which a journalist has been invited to such a discussion. Conceivably, Waltz, this is Mike Waltz, by coordinating a national security-related action over Signal, may have violated several provisions of the Espionage Act. And here we go again with the Espionage Act, which governs the handling of national defense information, according to several national security lawyers interviewed by my colleague Shane Harris for this story. So, that is, my colleague says, the experts say, this is how it is. Now, do other experts dispute that? Of course they would. Regardless, they are bringing up the notion that the Trump administration, because Donald Trump leads it, is inept and incompetent at handling critical national security materials. This is just a recall of the Jack Smith nonsense. Harris asked them to consider a hypothetical scenario in which a senior U.S. official creates a signal thread for the express purpose of sharing information with cabinet officials about an active military operation. He did not show them the actual signal messages or tell them specifically what had occurred. And I guess we can just take his word for it. We can't, but fine. All of these lawyers said that a U.S. official should not establish a signal thread in the first place. Information about an active operation would presumably fit the law's definition of national defense information. The Signal app is not approved by the government for sharing classified information. The government has its own systems for that purpose. If officials want to discuss military activity, they should go into a specially designed space known as a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. Most cabinet-level national security officials have one installed in their home, including Donald Trump, by the way, or communicate only on approved government equipment, the lawyers said. Normally, cell phones are not permitted inside a SCIF, which suggests that as these officials were sharing information about an active military operation, they could have been moving around in public. Had they lost their phones or had they been stolen, the potential risk to national security would have been severe. Well, no, the texts themselves do not bear that out. He is speaking now in relation to what these lawyers have said this hypothetical situation could have produced in a worst case scenario. Unfortunately, this is a false equivalence here. I guess you could say maybe there's a better way to describe this that's not coming to mind right now, between the situation that actually exists and the hypothetical they have presented. Okay, so these potential problems within the hypothetical weren't actually borne out in these messages, and he is encouraging the reader to equate these things when they are not equivalent. Hegseth, Ratcliffe, and other cabinet-level officials presumably would have the authority to declassify information, and several of the national security lawyers noted that the hypothetical officials on the Signal chain might claim they had declassified the information they share. But this argument rings hollow, they cautioned, because Signal is not an authorized venue for sharing information of such a sensitive nature, regardless of whether it has been stamped top secret or not. Okay. So they're saying that even in the instance where classified information was not shared, and it wasn't, because they could have declassified it, but there's no indication that even information rising to that level was shared. Signal is not the appropriate place for any of this, okay? So they are saying this app is not secure enough, therefore you can't share this information. Keeping the app aside, all right? I want to make sure that we are separating these issues. There was another potential problem. Walt set out some of the messages in the Signal group to disappear after a week and some after 4. That raises questions about whether the officials may have violated federal records law. Text messages about official acts are considered records that should be preserved. Under the records laws applicable to the White House and federal agencies, all government employees are prohibited from using electronic messaging applications such as Signal for official business unless those messages are promptly forwarded or copied to an official government account. This from a professor at the University of Maryland who used to direct litigation at NARA. Intentional violations of these requirements are a basis for disciplinary action. Additionally, agencies such as the Department of Defense restrict electronic messaging containing classified information to classified government networks and or networks with government-approved encrypted features. Several former U.S. officials told Harris and me that they had used Signal to share unclassified information and to discuss routine matters, particularly when traveling overseas without access to U.S. government systems. Okay. But they knew never to share classified or sensitive information on the app because their phones could have been hacked by a foreign intelligence service, which would have been able to read the messages on the devices. It is worth noting that Donald Trump, as a candidate for president and as president, repeatedly and vociferously demanded that Hillary Clinton be imprisoned for using a private email server for official business when she was Secretary of State. It's also worth noting that Trump was indicted in 2023 for mishandling classified documents, but the charges were dropped after his election. The charges were dropped because of the election, ostensibly, but of course the indictment was also a fake indictment that never would have worked in the first place because there was actually nothing there. Waltz and the other cabinet level officials were already potentially violating government policy and the law simply by texting one another about the operation. But when Waltz added a journalist, presumably by mistake, to his principals committee, he created new security and legal issues. Now the group was transmitting information to someone not authorized to receive it, and he's referring to himself here. That is the classic definition of a leak, even if it was unintentional, and even if the recipient of the leak did not actually believe it was a leak until Yemen came under American attack. All along, members of the Signal Group were aware of the need for secrecy and operation security. In his text detailing aspects of the forthcoming attack on Houthi targets, Hegseth wrote to the group, which at the time included me, "We are currently clean on OPSEC." So Hegseth was cognizant, of the importance of operational security. Now, Goldberg, at the beginning of this article, discusses how he was aware from the get-go that it was at least possible that these national security officials, of which there were many, Marco Rubio, Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, obviously Mike Waltz, some of their staffers, Susie Wiles, and some others, it was like 20 people on the text chain, were in this text group, and he recognized these people by their names or their initials, and no one realized that this unknown JG, Jeffrey Goldberg, was this outside reporter. That's what we're led to believe. He was aware that he could be getting opt and could be getting tricked himself, but he's just reporting as any reporter would. Now, including Jeffrey Goldberg in this Signal messaging group, what is the ultimate outcome of this? Well, no one is going to doubt that this attack was carried out. That's number one. Now, you can believe the attack was real or not. Doesn't matter to me. I'm not trying to prove it to you either way. But if it was not a real attack, or if it was an attack on the deep state, for instance, deep state assets, state-sponsored, regime-sponsored terrorist organizations around the world, which we can allow for in all these situations, it's entirely possible. But the idea that this was just an Iran-backed militia that was attacked does not make sense. China and Russia are allies of Iran, okay? Donald Trump has said he respects the Iranian people. He just sent a letter to the Ayatollah. He's made very clear over the last few weeks. They are trying to have a peace. Trump is trying to have a peaceful relationship with Iran. He says they can't get a nuclear weapon. We'll do anything to stop them getting a nuclear weapon. While at the same time, he's talking denuclearization with China and Russia. They had a deal in place during his first term to denuclearize, and they're still going to pursue that, even though these other rogue states have access to nuclear weapons. Well, that does not make sense. That is an absolute contradiction, okay? There's no way that both of those things can be true. So which one is not true? Well, Trump denuclearizing seems very relevant because nuclear weapons, probably not real. No proof they are real, okay? No reason to believe they're real. The existential threats are used to make populations comply with the regime's demands. That's what they're used for, to put a population under threat and get people to back a neocon war effort, wherever that war effort is, all right? So he wants to denuclearize. Well, that wouldn't take anything other than an announcement that we have denuclearized. and an announcement, oh, now we have a Golden Dome. So even if there are these rogue nukes being set off as missiles from Little Rocket Man in North Korea or whatever, we're still okay. Okay? He is psychologically dismantling the existential threat of nuclear weapons. Okay? And in the process of doing this, one thing he's almost definitely not doing is going after Iranian assets in a way that would jeopardize any of that. Okay? Now, I'm not saying groups in Iran aren't funding terror, to be very clear. And I'm not saying that Iran doesn't have an evil twin faction that is able to exert some level of power and control. Again, to be clear. But we should be looking at these things through the proper framing, not the one we are given by the TV. So all that said, one thing for certain is that everybody believes the attack happened and was successful. It was carried out. The results, as reported, were achieved. And Jeffrey Goldberg has helped spread that story to the American public. Okay? So all of that is baked into the cake at this point. And Jeffrey Goldberg has probably unwittingly played a role in doing that. Now, you might not think that's important to do right now, and you might think that this part of the analysis is therefore pointless. Well, you're going to say something's fake and you're going to analyze it in all these ways. Maybe you're right. I don't think you're right, but maybe you are, okay? We're talking about what the upshot of this op ultimately is. They're trying to dunk on Trump. Jeffrey Goldberg cannot resist the attempt to dunk on Trump. And it could well be that Trump's entire team is just laughing at how easy this was. This is taking advantage of Trump derangement syndrome, if you ask me. And when you are able to get a journalist like Jeffrey Goldberg to amplify and disseminate a Trump narrative so easily, that is a pretty good win in the information war. Now, Jeffrey Goldberg said this yesterday. I'm going to have to bump this up in my rundown. Let's take a minute to listen to Jeffrey Goldberg and Tim Pukashel's Miller from the Never Trump deranged normie neocon outlet, The Bulwark, interviewing Jeffrey Goldberg yesterday.
Now, the Secretary of Defense and the White House press secretary have said you're lying, have said there are no war plans there, have said there's no classified information. So the obvious question is, shouldn't you now demonstrate it? Shouldn't you publish the text?
No, because they're wrong. They're wrong.
But how can you prove that you're wrong? Maybe should you provide them to the House and Senate Special Committees on Intelligence? Maybe. I don't know.
Wow. Well, you want to become my lawyer?
I'm throwing this out there, Jeff. I don't know. I mean, look. The White House press secretary
I feel like no. I mean, I obviously. Let me just put it this way: my colleagues and I, and the advice that and the people who are giving us advice on this have some interesting conversations to have about this.
Yeah.
But just because they're irresponsible with material doesn't mean that I'm going to be irresponsible with this material. And you know what? I could, whatever. I mean, you've had a long history, as I have, with dealing with them. And at moments like this, when they're under pressure because they've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar or whatever, they will just literally say anything to get out of the moment, to get out of the jam. And that's okay. I get it. I get the defensive reaction. And but here's the thing. My obligation, I feel, is to the idea that we take national security information seriously. And maybe in the coming days I'll be able to let you know that, okay, I have a plan to have this material vetted publicly. But I'm not going to say that now because there's a lot of conversations that have to happen about that.
Makes sense.
And all of my inclinations, as you can tell, including withholding the name of the CIA undercover officer, all of my inclinations are. I have a pretty clear standards in my own behavior of what I consider information that I consider to be in the public interest, even if it's technically classified or not. Information that's in the public interest, information that's not in the public interest, and I'm just going to I'm sticking to my principles here.
So Jeffrey Goldberg, editor of The Atlantic, is sticking to his principles, concerned that classified information in the text messages would get him in trouble if he released it. And he does not, of course, want to jeopardize national security. You can't exactly accuse the president of jeopardizing national security and then turn around and do it yourself in the exact same way. So what a very principled stance for Jeffrey Goldberg to take yesterday. Well, today, the updated a new article, an update in The Atlantic. Here are the attack plans that Trump's advisors shared on Signal. And so he goes through all the rest of the messages. He posts the entire conversation. The thing that he said he would not do because it contained classified information has now been posted. And the conversation, I believe, is mostly milquetoast and maybe not worth spending much time on, except for the J.D. Vance bit. Team, I am out today. I am out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, but I think we are making a mistake. 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There's a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this, as POTUS said, is to send a message. But I am not sure the president is aware of how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I am willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, but there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc. So J.D. Vance very clearly wanted to separate himself from the president and make a clear record of his opposition to this plan. Yes, I'm going to go along with it. Now, I don't have any idea why J.D. Vance would be included in any decision-making capacity whatsoever. And you could say, well, he's the vice president. Of course he's included. No, that's actually not an of course at all. Why would J.D. Vance be included in the decision-making process for a military strike? He's not the commander-in-chief. Donald Trump doesn't have to turn to him. He doesn't have to include him. And he is included on this text message, which contains a number of television characters like Tulsi Gabbard. I am so let's break this down one more time. A very similar point to be made. One of the upshots is that the attack definitely happened. Narratively speaking, okay? Narratively speaking, everyone understands that the attack happened. Number two, everyone narratively, in a narrative sense only, okay? The truth or falsity of the underlying event is not what's relevant here and not what I'm discussing. To be abundantly clear, okay? It doesn't matter whether or not the attack was real or fake. The narrative is creating a belief in the people, regardless of the status of the event. The people believe that the event is real, people on both sides, because now it has been sold to them as real by both sides. People will also understand that J.D. Vance attempted to diverge from the president's viewpoint on this, and there's now a record of him doing that behind the scenes. So, is it important in any way that the public see for themselves that J.D. Vance is expressing his disagreement with the president, and not only a disagreement, but a disagreement made in a disrespectful way? Trump doesn't understand that this is undermining his messaging with Europe. J.D. Vance is saying that? Just saying. Let's keep going. Politico's headline this morning. or this is from yesterday, apologies. Europe fumes at Trump team's insults in leaked Signal chat. Sometimes it's better not to know what your so-called friends say behind your back. Case in point, when your closest ally calls you pathetic, accuses you of freeloading, and says you should be made to pay for something you never knew they were going to do. Let's skip down to some of the comments here. A UK diplomat said they had watched aghast as the spectacular leak emerged on Monday night, describing it as wild. The diplomat noted that it underlined the impression that Vance was the driver of U.S. hostility toward Europe. The person said, forced others, including Trump, into a tougher position because he doesn't want to look weaker than Vance. Britain's former Defense Secretary Grant Shapps said that some in the Trump administration clearly need re-educating about their allies. It was wrong of them to say European militaries had done nothing to address the problem of Iran-backed Houthis targeting commercial shipping. The leaked messages even included a conversation about how to make Europe remunerate the U.S. for the cost of the military action. In fact, the planned airstrikes detailed in the private Signal app group were supported by British refueling aircraft, according to the reports. So Europe was very offended by J.D. Vance, and they said, we are doing things about the Houthis, and we're even supporting this effort. Why are you making us out to be the bad guys? And that's going to make Trump potentially look weaker than Vance unless Trump does something more. Weird that Trump is being forced into these positions once again by J.D. Vance. Here is Marco Rubio responding to this scandal. This is CNN.
On the first question, let me just say on the Signal thing. This thing was set up for purposes of coordinating how everyone was going to call. You know, when these things happen, I need to call foreign ministers, especially of our close allies. We need to notify members of Congress. Other members of the team have different people they need to notify as well. And that was the purpose of why it was set up. Obviously, someone made a mistake. Someone made a big mistake and added a journalist. Nothing against journalists, but you ain't supposed to be on that thing. So they got on there and this happened. I've been, I can speak to myself or my presence on it. I think my role on it was just speaking for my role. I contributed to it twice. I identified my point of contact, which is my chief of staff. And then later on, I think 3 hours after the White House's official announcements had been made, I congratulated the members of the team. I've been assured by the Pentagon and everyone involved that none of the information that was on there, though not intended to be divulged, obviously that was a mistake and that shouldn't have happened, and the White House is looking at it, but that none of the information on there at any point threatened the operation or the lives of our servicemen. And in fact, it was a very successful operation. It is an ongoing operation. But that was the intent behind it. And again, I think the Pentagon's made it clear that nothing on there would have endangered the lives or the mission. And the mission's been very successful.
Declassified the information?
Well, the Pentagon says it was not. And not only did they say it was not, they make very clear that it didn't put in danger anyone's life or the mission. There was no intelligence information. And understand, when this story first broke, they were sort of alluding to whether war maps, whether there was no war plans on there. This was a sort of description of what we could inform our counterparts around the world when the time came to do so. Again, look, I think the White House is looking at this entire thing. How did that journalist get on there? Why was this the appropriate? I think there'll be reforms and changes made, so this was not going to happen again. It can't. But I wanted everybody to understand why this thing was even set up in the first place, and also understand very clearly the mission was successful, and at no point was it endangered. And that's coming from the highest-ranking officials at the agency that was in charge of the actual operation, which is the Pentagon.
So Marco Rubio, it wasn't him. He didn't do anything wrong. And I'm not suggesting that he did by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying he's making it very clear. I was not really involved in this. I listed the name of my staffer, and that's the extent of my involvement. This also wasn't war plans. They weren't even attack plans. This was just something's happening. We're discussing it and how to relate to our counterparts around the world. So nothing to see here, essentially, according to Rubio. Here is Mike Waltz last night on Fox News. Oops. 1 second. Hold processing. Here is Mike Waltz on Fox News.
We're going to get to the bottom of it. I just talked to Elon on the way here. We've got the best technical minds looking at how this happened. But I can tell you for 100%, I don't know this guy. I know him by his horrible reputation, and he really is the bottom scum of journalists. And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone, and we're going to figure out how this happens. So you don't know. We're going to get.
Now that, and I'm sorry about the volume. That was a little quiet, I know. That was quite a claim. He is essentially implying that he did not add Jeffrey Goldberg. Now, in the text chain, maybe I can pull the picture up. I hope that it is listed in this article. Hold for processing here. Oh, yes, here it is. So the first screenshot included by Goldberg. This is the group. It says, Michael Waltz added you to the group. So Goldberg's claim is that Waltz added him to the group. Waltz, you just saw him, assuming he's an honest man, and Trump has come to his defense this week. Assuming he's an honest man, he's saying Elon is going to check out. We're going to put the best tech minds on this to see if there's any way that maybe something on the back end of Signal, there was some manipulation involved. Someone added Jeffrey Goldberg through Mike Waltz's name, through Mike Waltz's account. That implies that maybe something else is going on here. And we're going to have to wait and find out what that is. I don't even want to speculate on what that might be, but there's something going on there. Hold for processing 1 second. Rumble rant in the chat, Polymath Anon, $5. Second attempt today at saying, I appreciate your work, Chris, and I'm sure APL does as well. All right, so I missed the first attempt. Bring it back to me and I'll get to it. I apologize for missing that. I had to reload at one point. Dennis in the chat says that it was Waltz's deputy, Alex Wong. I have seen that claim made and supported. I'm not sure that's as nailed down as I would want it to be, to just take that as a given. And when you're suggesting that you are going to have a tech team come in to see if there's any way that Signal could have been manipulated, I got to think that at least there's a possibility there's something more going on here. But I am aware that Alex Wong is the current person deemed responsible. Let's go to Donald Trump. He was in the Oval Office today taking questions and had this to say.
Should Secretary Hegseth consider his position over the Signal?
Hegseth is doing a great job. He had nothing to do with this. Hegseth. How do you bring Hegseth into it? He had nothing to do. Look, it's all a witch hunt. Here we are talking about some of the greatest business deals ever made. The greatest companies in the world are moving into the United States, and you want to ask about whether or not Signal works. I don't know that Signal works. I think Signal could be defective, to be honest with you. And I think that's what we have to, because you use Signal and we use Signal and everybody uses Signal, but it could be a defective platform, and we're going to have to find that out.
So it could be a defective platform, and we're going to have to find that out. So once again, Signal comes into focus. Now, you saw all of the uproar from Jeffrey Goldberg and the response from the lawyers that they contacted to give them these important opinions about the Signal platform. Well, they haven't always felt like Signal was not an appropriate place for national security matters to be addressed because of how secure Signal was. This is the Trump Rapid Response Team on X, formerly Twitter. Flashback to 2017 when The Atlantic called Signal the gold standard of encrypted messaging and admitted it was used by Obama and Hillary Clinton staffers, as well as staffers of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. So it used to be okay, and now it is not okay. That's quite sad. Well, here's another issue. As I said, this issue came out, this article about the Signalgate, they're now calling it, came out on Monday. There was already a hearing scheduled for Tuesday morning in front of the Senate with Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, Kash Patel, and others. And this is Politico from this morning. Gabbard says Signal comes pre-installed on government devices. Here was her quote. Or let's just take these couple paragraphs. The spy chief pointed to guidance issued by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in December that recommended highly targeted individuals, including government personnel, use only end-to-end encrypted communications. This is Tulsi. They named Signal as an app as an example of such an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. This came the day after CIA Director John Ratcliffe testified to the Senate Intelligence Committee that Signal was uploaded to his CIA devices within days of his confirmation. The CISA guidance was issued following the major breach of U.S. telecommunications providers by Chinese hacking group Salt Typhoon last year, which allowed hackers to tap into the phones of top U.S. officials, including President Trump and J.D. Vance. So, was CISA laying out a rug for the Trump administration to step on? Did they know that Signal was somehow compromised and install it on the devices of the incoming administration and tell them, go ahead and use this messaging app on these devices? Well, perhaps they're the ones who said it was okay to do. The Atlantic said it used to be the gold standard. Now, all of a sudden, it's terrible, according to the Atlantic. You're not allowed to share privileged information on this app. It's just totally irresponsible. You're mishandling classified national security information. How bad? CISA is responsible, according to now Politico, for installing Signal on these apps. John Ratcliffe, on his CIA phone, already had it installed. Tulsi Gabbard says this is one of the end-to-end encrypted apps that we are allowed to use because it's safe and protected. Well, it turns out it's not. This is reminiscent to the spying that was done on Trump's campaign, and then more particularly on the executive office of the president once Trump came into office. And there have been attempts to get Trump to either call for the resignation of or to convince the people to resign of Mike Waltz and of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. In fact, neocon Bill Kristol was out there on X, formerly Twitter, today, suggesting that Hegseth not only must resign, but will resign, and it'll be by Friday, and then Tom Cotton should take his place. Let us continue. This is from Badlands Media today. Watchdog sues Trump officials over use of Signal for military discussions. The lawsuit alleges that the conversation, which mistakenly included the Atlantic's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, violated federal records laws by taking place on an unclassified commercial app. Now, these issues have kind of already been worked through in the narrative. We understand that this isn't a real vulnerability and that this lawsuit will never actually work. If it did, it would then be appealed and eventually it would not work. All of this is entirely irrelevant, but they are attempting to sue, and the organization is called American Oversight. Okay? I don't want to linger on that for too long because we have many things to get to and probably not enough time. The White House just yesterday while doing the executive orders on election integrity and other issues, also released this statement. What timing? And again, the attack that we are talking about was now 11 days ago. So Goldberg had these messages for 9 days and didn't release them, and then released them intentionally on Monday to make a big issue of this while other stuff was going on this week, including these important executive orders, etc. And just hours before, 12 hours before, 16 hours, whatever it was, even if it was 24, I don't know, before the Senate hearings that would feature all of these people, putting them on the spot, allowing Democrats to tee off, this being the number one headline story of the last 3 days. Trump administration's actions made Houthi terrorists pay. Democrats and their media allies have seemingly forgotten that President Donald J. Trump and his national security team successfully killed terrorists who have targeted U.S. troops and disrupted one of the most consequential shipping routes in the world. This is a coordinated effort to distract from the successful actions taken by President Trump and his administration to make America's enemies pay and keep Americans safe. And again, this messaging from Trump is going to be the takeaway for Americans across the board, even those that would hate Donald Trump and not support anything his administration has done. They have Trojan horsed this messaging into the American public. The Biden administration sat back as a band of pirates with precision-guided, Iran-provided weaponry exacted a toll system in one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. Wow. So the regime supported a toll system that was enforced by a terrorist organization to control shipping routes. Well, that's one of the parts of the regime apparatus that we talk about all the time. Control over media, control over finances, economies, currencies, sanctions, etc., economic warfare, control over resources, control over trade routes, and ultimately control over military. Well, this is exactly what we're talking about here. In fact, in 2023, Houthi terrorists attacked U.S. Navy warships 174 times and attacked commercial shipping vessels 145 times. And as a result, 75% of U.S. flagged shipping has been forced to navigate the southern coast of Africa rather than through the Suez Canal. Biden's weakness invited these unacceptable attacks while President Trump put these terrorists on notice. Okay? And so it's the interplay. This is one thing to the other. This is what the regime is doing. This is how companies have had to respond. This is what the Trump administration is doing to take care of all this. Right? It is also important to remember that the upshot of this war in Gaza that was launched as a result of the paragliding go-kart incident, the upshot is probably going to be the completion of the Ben Gurion Canal, which will provide an alternate shipping route to the Suez Canal. Just saying. I know. I can't say everything's fake. It's just that everything I say is fake, turns out to be fake, and understanding it as fake, which leads you to then spend time on narrative-only analysis, ends up reaching all the correct conclusions, whereas pretending it's all real doesn't reach any of the correct conclusions until the TV tells you, which is, by the way, the same as not doing any analysis at all. If the only things you're saying are being said on the same timeline, the TV is communicating them to you, and your understanding of the world is based on that timeline, then there's no way to catch up to real time. You are always going to be held in the past on an informational timeline, okay? The normies are not going to wake up in that method, with that method. It's impossible, right? I mean, I'm not even trying to toot my own horn, okay? I'm trying to hammer this home so that people actually get what it is I've been attempting to do all this time. And I know that you guys do, which is the most frustrating thing, right? Especially in a subscriber stream where the only people in the chat and watching live actually do understand these principles. Let's just continue. So I just said 1 moment ago that there is a lawsuit filed to contest or to try to seek, quote unquote, accountability or gum up the works or cause problems for the administration or whatever, get more information that they don't want to divulge. There's a lawsuit in the aftermath of this Signal controversy. This is Axios from today. Judge who ruled against Trump deportation flights will oversee Signal lawsuit. And that there is Judge Boasberg once again. So how about that? Magical. How does it happen? All these illegitimate judges in a district court in the foreign occupied, foreign city, I don't know, what do you call it? A city state like the City of London or like the Vatican? Totally unaccountable. It's not part of any state. The founders, especially the anti-federalists, knew this from the very beginning and did not want one of these, a federal city, because they're accountable only to the unconstitutional, anti-constitutional, illegitimate, foreign occupying government that was set up. The only adherence to the Constitution that they actually have is that of the inverted secret Constitution after the overthrow through the Reconstruction Amendments, as detailed by leftist, communist, Zionist, Columbia Law School professor George P. Fletcher in his book, Our Secret Constitution. Okay? So we have a court overseen in the federal city operating on the inverted Constitution and whatever federal laws all of the illegitimate people in the federal government come up with. They're basically just pleasing themselves inside that circle. No regard to the original Constitution whatsoever. And they get carte blanche. And so all these cases are being handled there. Now, is that all being done to show us the problems with this system? I believe it probably is. But if it's not, then you should at least take note of the absolute corruption that we see here. A couple of Rumble rants in the last few minutes. Beachbound 904, $20. Thank you for my attitude adjustment, Chris. I knew I could count on you. And thank you for helping me to clarify that at the beginning of the episode. She was like, what did it say? I don't know. I hope Chris has an attitude adjustment. And it was communicating that she was hoping her day could get a little pick-me-up from listening to this show. And I guess it worked. I don't know how, because I feel like maybe I'm the one that needs the attitude adjustment today, but thank you. LBS 8844A, $20. Keep crushing it, Chris. Crushing with a K. And, well, thanks. I will do my best in whatever time we have left. How about this one? This was a big headline in the Federalist yesterday, and I don't want to take too much time on this. I was going to go through it at more length, but the headline is, a third of all D.C. district judges were not born in the United States. And now, if you are a leftist or if you are extremely sensitive to issues about nationalism, then you might bristle upon hearing that and say, well, that's fine. These people came here as young people and they have been American since they were young. Well, maybe, maybe not. They were appointed by Obama and Joe Biden. One of them, Tanya Chutkin. Amit Mehta. These are openly anti-Trump judges who have written and said terrible things about Donald Trump, and they were not even born in this country. Okay? How is it that we are putting people in such important positions with judicial supremacy, with judicial review, giving them the power to halt the national government, to halt the executive branch in its place at any moment through their own whim? And they're like, not even born in America. It really is incredible. And it's not as though they're following the law. They're making up the law as they go. They are focusing on the practical concerns. Oh, well, this is going to do X, Y, Z. Therefore, in this situation, we're just going to have to stop the federal government. We're worried that what they're doing might cause discrimination. And because of the illegitimate and unratified 14th Amendment, we're not allowed to do that. And therefore, the original Constitution be damned. We're just going to stop the executive branch from carrying out the functions as designated by the president, who was elected in an obvious and overwhelming mandate. All of these are symptoms of a system that is sick beyond repair, that needs to be torn down to its roots and potentially be replaced by nothing. Let us go to X, formerly Twitter, to see what Mike Johnson has to say about these courts to ABC News this week.
Getting pretty ugly. House Speaker Mike Johnson issuing an open threat now, saying that Congress has authority to stop providing funding to federal courts. Listen to what the speaker said just a little while ago.
We do have authority over the federal courts, as you know. We can eliminate an entire district court. We have power funding over the courts and all these other things. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Congress is going to act. So stay tuned for that.
All right, Jay, let's get right to it. This is all centered around the Alien Enemies Act and whether deportation.
All right, so we'll skip their analysis of that. What does it sound like Mike Johnson's saying there? We can eliminate a federal district court. And they can. Are they going to? Well, I don't know, because the Congress itself is not legitimate. And if they do, it would be a fake Congress eliminating a fake district court where all of these ridiculous, nonsensical, irrelevant decisions are being carried out. You don't have to go down this road with me. You really don't, okay? But I hope that you're beginning to see the possibility that all of this stuff by which we have been governing our lives is part of a grand farce and hoodwinking that has been set up with a complexity that people have a hard time imagining as anything other than the result of real and legitimate behavior that may have just been all enacted by people with poor motivations or poor morals or whatever. It's entirely possible that we have just been hoodwinked about the entire thing and that we continue to go along with all of this because the television continues to tell us that it is our responsibility to believe in it and trust the system and support these institutions and continue sending our money to the government. Continue allowing them to tax us, continue complying with their laws, despite the fact that they are antithetical to the Constitution and that it is court precedent that laws antithetical to the Constitution do not have to be followed by anyone. Our pain is self-chosen. Polymath Anon, Chris crushes every day. APL agrees. I'm not sure she does, but... Will the Congress defund and eliminate the D.C. District Court? Well, they certainly should. This is Kyle Cheney of Politico updating District of Columbia Notice of Electronic Filing, American Oversight v. Hegseth, case assigned to James Boasberg. I'm trying to, on the fly, figure out how I can jam all this in a minimal amount of time. I'm not sure it's going to work, but let's move to Trump's announcement of another executive order yesterday.
Next, sir, we have a presidential memorandum for your attention. This memorandum requires the immediate declassification of all FBI files relating to the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. This was obviously one of the instances of the weaponization of law enforcement powers of prosecution against you and others. We believe that it's long past time for the American people to have a full and complete understanding of what exactly is in those files.
Which gives the media the right to go in and check it. You probably won't bother because you're not going to like what you see. But this was total weaponization. It's a disgrace. Should never happen in this country. But now you'll be able to see for yourselves, all declassified. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All declassified?
Yes, sir.
Everything?
The FBI file with there's a classified annex, but other than that, this we'll put everything in the public eye.
Is anybody going to look? What about you? Going to look? And frankly, the FBI should be ashamed of themselves, and so should the Department of Justice, and so should Biden.
And he is right. They all should be ashamed of themselves. And we don't talk about those things anymore because it's all been made better. And if you say it hasn't, then you're not cheerleading. You're blackpilling. You're causing people to be upset about things when the headlines say they should be happy. Immediate declassification of materials related to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Crossfire Hurricane legislation. By the authority vested in me as president, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, I hereby direct the following. Except as provided below, I have determined that all of the materials referenced in the presidential memorandum of January 19th, 2021 are no longer classified. I further determined that the material proposed for redaction by the FBI in a cover letter dated January 17th, 2021 remains classified. My decision to declassify the materials described above does not extend to materials that must be protected from disclosure pursuant to orders, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And I'm not blah, blah, blahing President Trump because it's not important. I'm just saying we're trying to move quickly along here. So January 19th, 2021, people may remember this story. Donald Trump declassified all of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, but none of it ever made it to the public. We were told that the FBI and various other elements of the administrative deep state, they wanted to get their shot at figuring out what needed to be redacted from those files, what they didn't want out to the public, and so they held it back. And then they held it back, and they held it back, and they held it back. And then Donald Trump wasn't president anymore, quote unquote. So we never got that information. It was all declassified over 4 years ago, and he just had to do the same thing again yesterday. Something he did in the first term is being done again so that the public can know about it and the public can see it, even though it was already done. How does it happen? Again. How does it happen again? This is Chuck Grassley from 2022. And there were a million links I could have grabbed, but this one seemed apropos. Biden and Meng continues to conceal declassified Crossfire Hurricane records. He says, we remain concerned that over 1 year from the date then President Trump directed the Justice Department to declassify certain Crossfire Hurricane records, the Justice Department has not only failed to declassify a single page, the department has failed to identify for Congress records that it knows with certainty to be covered by the declassification directive. They did not go along with Trump's order to declassify this information, or at least it didn't make it to the public. Where could it have gone if not to the public? Well, it could have gone where all the information goes to die, which I believe is Pico Grande. I would imagine that all of this information is part of active litigation or investigations and will not make it to the public until such time as we are alerted to other things. And again, I think that all of this stuff is converging on the same timeline, which just happens to be this week for a very particular reason. And I hope that you are maybe beginning to see how I believe all of this stuff comes into play together and at the same time for a very particular reason. Crossfire Hurricane is critical to the Rico Grande. And let's just quickly go through a bit of this. Actually, you know what? I think if there's anything today to skip in the interest of time, it's probably this one. I'm just going to alert you to the headline. Fox News from yesterday. Trump orders FBI to declassify documents from Crossfire Hurricane Russia investigation. Okay. So the reason I was going to bring this up is because it gives a pretty good, like, point by point, blow by blow through what Crossfire Hurricane actually amounted to. Everything from John Brennan's briefings in 2016 during the campaign to the Steele dossier, Fusion GPS, Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Fusion GPS then worked with Perkins Coie, that's Marc Elias, the Mueller investigation. Mueller took over Crossfire Hurricane, etc. And we get down to Andrew McCabe, and eventually, I believe it will say in this article, possibly Andrew Weissman, but let's skip that for now. A lot of you are familiar with Crossfire Hurricane, but I'm sure that some of you are not. Let's go back to Donald Trump yesterday in the cabinet room for another announcement.
I have an executive order for your attention. We've taken action against a number of law firms that have participated either in the weaponization of government, the weaponization of the legal system for political ends, or have otherwise engaged in illegal or inappropriate activities. The law firm of Jenner and Block is one of these law firms. This is a law firm that, as you know, employed Andrew Weissman after he came off of the Mueller investigation. It's a law firm that's engaged in invidious racially and sexually discriminatory practices. It's also a law firm that has participated in the weaponization of the legal system against American principles and values. And we believe that the measures in this executive order will help correct that.
And Andrew Weissman is the main culprit?
He's certainly
with respect to this firm.
He is one of a number of reasons that we believe this executive order is formed.
He's a bad guy. Okay.
Signed by hand, no auto pen there. So Andrew Weissman, he's a bad guy, and they're going after the law firm Jenner and Block, just as they have with 3 other law firms previously. What are those law firms? Covington and Burling, that's Jack Smith. Paul Weiss, that's Mark Pomerantz. Perkins Coie, that's Marc Elias. Jenner and Block, that's Andrew Weissman. So these are people involved in the Get Trump efforts of the last, 10 years at this point. Let us continue. This is the presidential action itself. And let's go through just the Weissman part. In addition, Jenner was thrilled to rehire the unethical Andrew Weissman after his time engaging in partisan prosecution as part of Robert Mueller's entirely unjustified investigation. Andrew Weissman's career has been rooted in weaponized government and abuse of power, including devastating tens of thousands of American families who worked for the now defunct Arthur Andersen LLP, only to have his unlawfully aggressive prosecution overturned by the Supreme Court. The numerous reports of Weissman's dishonesty, including pursuit of non-existent crimes, bribery to foreign nationals, and overt demand that the federal government pursue a political agenda against me, is a concerning indictment of Jenner's values and principles. And hold for 1 second. Was Andrew Weissman involved in litigation in the Enron scandal? Ah, yes. Andrew Weissman played a central role in the Enron task force. So that is what Donald Trump is referring to with Arthur Andersen. So we have an Enron callback now, which is very impressive because I have at least some suspicion that Arthur Anderson, let me ask the machine here. Was Arthur Anderson the accounting firm used by the Department of Defense? And the answer is no. Wait, hold on. I want to make sure. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service does the accounting. That was set up by Defense Secretary Dick Cheney in 1991. There's some connection with Arthur Anderson, and I'm going to have to explore this, and I will substantiate it to you at some point. But the Enron scandal happened in 2002, so very shortly after 9/11, and then the country's eyes were totally on Enron, and Arthur Anderson was taken down as a result of that scandal. And I haven't looked at this in a few years, but I remember in 2022 being fairly convinced that there was an Arthur Anderson role in the audits of the Defense Department. Let me just ask the machine one more question. Was there any link between Arthur Anderson accounting and the Department of Defense? There was a link. They had an $11.4 million contract with the DoD. This connection was revealed during a review of federal contracts with Enron and Arthur Anderson, ordered by the White House Budget Director Mitchell Daniels in 2002. The review was initiated to determine if the companies met government standards for business ethics and integrity, particularly in light of Enron. And I suspect that there is some important linkage there. So apologies for this tangent while I'm trying to take things into high gear. This was from The Atlantic this morning, the pathetic, cowardly collapse of big law. And this is an article about how these big law firms are just taking it, and the other white shoe law firms in D.C. are not taking an active role in standing up to the Trump administration. Because, of course, all of this is a great overstepping of the Trump administration's authority to act. And they are most concerned about the submission of Paul Weiss, which we went over last week. The article concludes, it is difficult to see this as anything other than an utter capitulation by a large, well-heeled law firm putting financial success ahead of principle. Its remaining clients may well wonder at the limits of the firm's loyalty, and its partners will wonder at the stain on their reputation. Though the firm is, to be clear, a victim of Trump's assault, its abject surrender is a choice. And they note earlier in the article, and I hope that I can find it quickly. They were especially concerned because they were recognizing that Trump feels all of this was the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, these law firms, and the corrupt administrative bureaucratic deep state, the foreign occupying government of the federal city, was illegitimately pursuing the Trump administration for lawfare and legal action, both during the first Trump administration and then in the period of the last 4 years when the Get Trump effort was going on. Their argument was it was justified in those cases, and now it's not justified. So therefore, the law firm should all stand up against Donald Trump. And they note that only the British Accreditation Registry, is that what it's called? I always forget the BAR acronym. And somebody in my listening audience is probably already yelling at me or typing it out. British accredited registry. And we are told that the bar in America is not an acronym. It's just a word that came from somewhere. The Atlantic article just put forward the notion that these law firms have a responsibility to their clients to be loyal in opposing the Trump administration. Who do they think the Trump administration is representing? And who do they think the loyalty should then be to? It's not to the American people. It's not to the Constitution. It's to the legal profession and their clients, all of which are apparently members of the deep state that need to be defended by these law firms. Here is, let me see. Man, I'm going to have to save this image. Apologies, hold for brief processing. This is a post from Jack Posobiec today. And I know that every time I say Posobiec, people get very, very upset. But he notes this tweet from 2016 from Rick Brudy. Judge James Boasberg ruled to delay release of 14,900 new Hillary emails until after Election Day. Smells bad. Boasberg in 2016 helping Hillary Clinton out when it comes to the email scandal. And before, we talked about how Obama and Hillary Clinton officials and staffers, etc., were operating on that Signal app. And we know that Hillary allowed for, carried on government business on all of these, on her private server through channels that were not acceptable to the government and that actually compromised national security. And I think now you're beginning to see, I hope you're beginning to see, all of this coming back around. How is the whole thing all just embedded in these stories from the last 3 days? It's a lot. There's so much going on here. How quickly can I tear through the rest of this? I want to really see what stuff we can get to. Let's jump down here toward the end. This is actually, we're going to skip that one and focus on one last aspect of all of this. The American Thinker put this little post together yesterday on Telegram. And because I can't share Telegram posts, I'm just going to have to talk through this and you'll have to bear with me. But they wrote, Signal, an application developed by the U.S. deep state. It was initially backed by the CIA-backed Open Technology Fund, which is affiliated with Radio Free Asia. Okay? And so the Radio Free, we talked about that. They're suing the Trump administration. They want to continue to be able to propagandize on behalf of the regime in foreign countries around the world. They are coordinated, probably through the CIA, I think in league with USAID, although don't quote me on that. The chairwoman of Signal is Catherine Marr, who has been involved with the National Endowment for Democracy, organizations focused on regime change. She has held memberships with the Atlantic Council, the World Economic Forum, the U.S. State Department's Foreign Affairs Policy Board, and more. She showed support for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020, while regularly sharing far-left talking points and criticizing Donald Trump. And she suspended veteran NPR editor Yuri Berliner, who served a 5-day suspension for blowing the whistle on liberal bias at the organization. And so she was running our state media, our Radio Free Europe, NPR. And she's the chairwoman of the board of directors at Signal. She hits all of them. It's incredible. And let's just get her opinions. She was actually, there was a separate hearing going on today featuring this lady, Catherine Marr, trying to protect the paid propaganda efforts of these
White
various
people should pay
outlets.
reparations.
I've never said that, sir.
Yes, you did. You said it in January of 2020. You tweeted, "Yes, the North. Yes, all of us. Yes, America. Yes, our original collective sin and unpaid debt. Yes, reparations. Yes, on this day."
I don't believe that was a reference to fiscal reparations, sir.
What kind of reparations was it a reference to?
I think it was just a reference to the idea that we all owe much to the people who came before us.
I mean, I can't imagine anyone would ever believe that. And whatever, just an example of who this lady is. But the chairwoman of the board of directors of Signal, the app that was installed onto the phones of Trump administration officials, potentially so that they could be monitored. And this op has now brought all of this potentially to the surface, if I'm right in my read of it, which is very similar to the exact thing that happened with the monitoring of the executive office of the president after the whole Russia hoax in 2016 failed, the PP tape, all of that. They did get Michael Flynn, the NSA, out of there. It doesn't seem like they're going to get Waltz out of there. And I just want to, you know what? Let's just do this real quick. Okay. So JD Vance, his wife, Usha Vance, was set to take a trip to Greenland to participate in all these community activities. People in Europe, Denmark, etc., were really upset about these things, saying that the people of Greenland didn't actually want them to visit. And now JD has decided to join Usha Vance in going to Greenland, but rather than going to do all the things she was intended to do, she was scheduled to do, they're just going to visit the Space Force base and do the same sort of photo ops that he did today. And then they're going to come home. It's not going to be the trip that they originally intended. The Europeans are actually kind of making fun of this. They're like saying that JD Vance is actually trying to make this look more important while the trip is actually less important. And we'll see what all that ends up meaning in the way the Greenland situation plays out and in the way that JD Vance's status will play out. But here is the U.S. Sun from today. Stop the clock. TikTok ban update as JD Vance, quote, set to announce deal to save app, but it could mean changes to your feed. So JD Vance is going to save TikTok? How? Donald Trump already saved TikTok in 2020. All this has already been settled. It's all done. But JD Vance is going to claim credit for it. Isn't that amazing? How does it happen? It's like it was all scripted in advance to happen this way. Who's going to get credit for it? Trump is the one who delayed the ban. It was supposed to be January 19th, just the day before Trump was going to go into office. And then JD Vance was going to save it later. Oh, man, so great. But too bad, so sad. Donald Trump's already done it. They're saying, this article suggests that JD Vance is going to join an investment group that's going to save TikTok. Well, how's he going to do that as vice president of the United States of America? That's the sort of thing that we wouldn't normally think that a vice president would be allowed to do. Now, things have changed. Trump owns a social media app. But JD Vance? That's weird. Now, Oracle already has all the TikTok data, and they've already been setting up all this stuff. We were told last week that Perplexity might take it over. Where's JD Vance's involvement? Is Peter Thiel involved somehow? Is Peter Thiel involved with Larry Ellison? Or is that all just the same thing because they're all running these tech companies that are intimately linked and inextricably linked to the Department of Defense, DARPA, the U.S. government, CIA? Weird, huh? So what do we have? Let's try to round this out. The Signal scandal was timed specifically to disrupt the things that are happening this week, to make Donald Trump look like he's not actually prepared to protect the United States of America, like his administration is a clown show. JD Vance is out there disagreeing with Donald Trump, suggesting that Donald Trump doesn't understand the messaging and the way it'll be received. The dude listens to too many normie podcasts, I think, honestly. JD Vance just says the same thing that normie, quote unquote, conservative podcasters say. And then everybody's like, he's so smart. He knows all the things I know from watching the shows I watch. Okay. That's supposed to that is impressive in the normie sphere. He knows everything that Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino and Glenn Beck say and Ben Shapiro. Wowie zowie. He says all the same things they say.
Wow. Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
I can't believe it. What a genius. He's so well spoken. Okay. So he's out there disagreeing with Donald J. Trump. We have Trump bringing Crossfire Hurricane back into the picture, bringing Andrew Weissman back into the picture to align with the rest of these characters, Marc Elias, etc. Election integrity. All of these things are coming together right now. I don't think the timing is any mistake at all. And I really do look forward to see what is going to be revealed next week for Liberation Day. And with that, I've got to call a wrap on this show. John in Connecticut, $100 Rumble rant. Thank you very much, sir. Understanding that everything is fake leads you to treat all information as narrative, which leads to the actual reality. That's a $100 statement right there. Thank you very much, sir. I hope that at some point everybody else gets that too. Otherwise, we are going to participate in our hoodwinking until the end of days. We don't have to do that. We can pull everything back in and localize, just as we absolutely must do with our elections if we are going to be governed by people who actually have our best interests at heart and are chosen by us and govern us with our consent, because we don't have that now. And the longer people deny it because they're committed to saying, "Oh, that things you can't say things are fake." Yes, I can, and I will prove it eventually. And as the illusion drops away, as the matrix collapses in on itself, and people realize these things are fake, I am long past the point of expecting to ever hear apologies. Certainly not from the people in the truth community, the Q community, and the rest of MAGA and the influencers out there whose entire egos and reputations are built on 4 or 5 years of absolutely pointless and worthless analysis done for nothing more than the farming of attention, accepting all of the foundational inaccuracies like Joe Biden being president and all the analysis that evolves forward from those foundational errors is irretrievably broken. Okay? And they can't admit it because of that. Because then at that point, the whole gig falls apart. It's going to fall apart one way or another. That's the problem. I know that I'm definitely still wrong about some things. And I'm not saying my life is perfect or anything like that. But we can at least adhere to the principles that we are ostensibly following, like telling the truth and admitting when we don't know things. And if we operate going forward from that, we're not going to figure everything out, not even close, but we can prevent ourselves being constantly hoodwinked, and people are unwilling to do that because that requires admitting that the rest of it was wrong. And I've done it before, so I know how much that sucks, but it's still part of the process. Our pain is self-chosen. I will be back on Friday, same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes, I can't stand to see him in all this pain. You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you. Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in. For the love of God, let the boy move in with you. Good Lord.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.